Socrates.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm joined by a selective group of brilliant minds which have come here to discuss probably the most important. Yeah, I am talking about the person behind you, Fabio, obviously. But it is often said this is the topic tonight. I've got this. I found this quote. It says a system of morality which is based on relative emotional values is a mere illusion, a thoroughly vulgar conception which has nothing sound in it and nothing true. And that's by somebody called Socrates. I'm guessing he's a fan of Darth Dawkins, but nonetheless, we shall see.
Is it the Brazilian footballer?
Yeah, that's it. Of course
Yeah,
it is.
yeah,
That's who it is. Yeah, he's probably scored a hat trick.
Yeah.
Although, who knows why he was employed when he comes
No,
out.
it might have been a bit of an old own goal, that one.
You know, let's hope not. Let me just say hello to a few people. Tilting Windmill, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess that's giving away, doxing yourself a little bit. There we go. B.S. Lewis, is Alex Malpass here asking for a friend? Okay. Thank you, B.S. We can always rely on you for a little bit of comedy. Thank you. And, of course, selective group, selected by their parole officers, says Lucky.
Yeah.
Lucky, I think you've got a link. If you're hard enough, come and try. That's all I'm saying. And I don't mean that in a pejorative manner. It's just I quite like you. Okay, moving on. I'm going to pass it over to Fabio. Fabio, morality.
Hello?
Have you ever heard of it? Is it just a character, an arch nemesis of Sherlock Holmes, or is it something different?
No, my main issue and the question of this evening was more a little bit down to the ground. When I said the object of morality, I'm literally talking about what is morality as an object. Is it mineral? Is it animal? Is it gas? Is it fire? Is it a set of rules that we'll agree upon? I'm not really interested, in the relative morality towards, I mean, it's talking beyond the point. What I really want to ask you guys is, what is morality? What is a moral? Is it a shortcut that we give to a set of values which are nothing more than survival of the species or of the person, of the community? What do you think it is?
Okay, anyone like to jump
And
in?
good night, and everybody. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fabio. What is it?
Yeah,
That is a good point, and there have been some disputes in our community about that. So
I'd like to take a stab at it, if I may.
please, Bugrit.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to completely bugger it. Morality is a set of subjective values that we have codified. There you go. Chew that apart.
Codified. Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, but
Okay.
why do we call those values morals, or
Well,
they fall into the set of morality or not?
Well,
I mean,
we codify them so that everybody.
No. I'm not talking about the 25.
Hang on. I'm getting there. And we call them morals because we want to throw a stigma at everybody and saying, look, if you're a good person, if you stick to the code, and if you don't, then you're a bad person. That's what differentiates morals from ethics. Is if you don't stick to it, you're a bad person.
I don't know. Is it though? I don't know. I'm asking. I have no idea.
But it's codified. And I'm offering an answer. But yeah,
Jump
pick it
in
apart, pull it
anytime,
apart,
anybody.
discuss.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, what is morality? It seems like there is a wide selection of views on offer, and that in itself is a symptom of how imprecise, or not imprecise, but how like
I think I might.
ununified the
I
topic
think I
is.
can possibly help you a little bit, Simon.
Please.
Simos. Yeah, when I gave that answer, it was like, general answer as to what is morality. Yeah, what is a moral code? Obviously, as this is quite a large planet and we've been fairly dispersed in our occupation of it over the millennia, obviously we've developed numerous codes, and the issues we have in the modern world is because they're all being scrutinized under the lens of the internet and what is the prevailing viewpoint of the majority. And this is why we're getting discussions like ours that crop up and similar all over the place, because it's like, okay, what are the pros and cons of my moral code, my code of ethics, my code of being, if you like, versus yours? Does that help?
That sounds
Okay,
like a lot of gibberish to me, to be quite honest with you, all due respect. The code, there is no code. There's no agreement. That's why we're here. If there
That's
was
what I'm saying. There are a bunch of codes, and the reason we're here is because
Okay, well,
we're discussing them.
You can't say there is amorality when morality is a bunch of codes. There are a bunch of codes, maybe, but there's not a morality.
That's why I clarified at the beginning when I said my initial answer was the general case.
So
Well,
my
there is no
pushback.
general case. There's no general case. The morality, quote unquote, differs so much across the planet. There is no such thing. If you go to Saudi Arabia, the morals that are on display, quote unquote, morals are different from where Fabio is in Italy. They're different
Which
where,
is exactly
where I
what
am
I
in the
said.
UK, and they're different from where. But again, that's codes. That's not morality. There's no single morality. There's a bunch of codes. If you want to say that morality is a bunch of codes, then I think you've just totally redefined morality.
It's
pushback.
very
Sorry,
difficult to find somebody that adheres to all of the moral codes that there are. In fact, it's impossible. That's why when you're talking about somebody's morality, then it's usually attached to a code, be it cultural, religious, or just the social grouping that they're in with.
Right. So again, that's not morality. That's redefining morality.
I'm sure you'd find that when they are asked about their codes, the people that you're asking about would actually consider that you're asking them about their particular moral code.
Right. But again, you're supporting the case that there is no morality. There's still a bunch of codes. You can add.
I'm not supporting any case. I'm just offering points for discussion.
Well, the point you offered then, you're just being technical now. But again, if you take the word code and stick moral at the end of it or in front of it, what have you done? You've done nothing. You've just said, I've got a code and it's my code. That's it. That's not morality.
No, what you've done in that case is you've created a dogma, and whether people follow your dogma or not, then if you're lucky, you might get a cult out of it, I suppose.
Can I offer a pushback a little bit to this conversation?
Please. Sure, of course.
So my first pushback would be if morality is something that it's just something that we agree upon, or be it community or stuff like that. How do we explain that there are some behaviors that are generally defined as moral that are never discussed upon. Like, for example, if there is a community, nobody discussed the fact that that the general wellness of the community is something moral. I mean, people do not sit down to a table and agree upon, right? It's just something that seems to come up. Or, like, for example, the fact that everybody tries to live their life as best as they can for their own wealth and health and stuff like that. These, again, some societies consider moral, and if that's so, it's not something that we have to sit down and agree upon. Another pushback to the fact of code is that there is a theory in law which states the absolute opposite of what you said, Brian. When they define, especially in civil law, not the I always mess up
Criminal.
the stuff that you have in the US. You got so there's civil law and
Criminal.
something like
Yeah,
what?
civil and criminal, isn't it?
Criminal.
No, 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 no. It's different. I mean, they define. I mean, they got the set of law is defined, by judgments, from the judge. While in places like Italy, France, is that the law is done
Presidents,
by
yeah.
the parliament. Yeah.
Penal
Anyway,
code?
so
Oh, Constitution. Is that what you're talking about?
no, no,
Constitution?
no. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, regardless.
Okay.
In in places where the follow, the law, as defined, by the Romans and stuff like that. So the law is defined by a committee of people, be it a senate or whatever. They describe laws as a set of rules which is inspired by the moral of the society at the time. So the code actually is the other way around. There is a general sense of morality in the society, and the laws that those society express are an expression of the morality of the society at that time in that period.
Okay,
So
but where did
that would
where,
be so those would be my two pushbacks. How do we explain that there are some behaviors that we consider morals that nobody agrees upon, but they still there seems to be there for the majority of people in the world, I would mean, and also in the animal kingdom, and the fact that the code apparently comes after that there is a
the
common
legal
sense of
code
morality.
does, yeah. But before that, there was some authority, be it religious or just the local landlord, who dictated what what went as passable and what was objectionable behavior in his region. And as I said, a lot of the time, before it was legally codified, it was religiously codified.
No,
I
no, no,
mean,
no, no,
you look at
no.
the hadiths, and you look at the
You're,
Ten
you're,
Commandments,
you're
and
missing my point. You're missing my point. Laws
okay.
are not morals.
No, they're not.
Laws are made.
But,
Yeah, okay, but just give me a second.
yeah,
There is no codification of the morals. There are laws which are expression of the current moral or state of morality of that society in that instance.
I
It's
think
not
yeah.
it's not that people sit down and say, okay, this is our morality and we codify the morality. No. We have a general sense of morality. I mean, I live in a society where death penalty is considered barbaric, right?
Yeah.
So there is no law about
There's no
death
law that
penalty.
requires death penalty.
Actually, there are laws which prohibit of expatriating people or sending people back in countries where they will be accused of a
Where they're
crime
going to be
which
executed.
might
Yeah.
result in death penalty.
Yeah.
So it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, could I
I
offer
think
the
that can be-
distinction between the
Well,
two?
hang on a minute, Brian. Let me jump in as well there, just to
Okay.
not widen the discussion, but just to add to, I guess, Fabio's point in some way, which is, of course, when you think of code, you think of, the Hammurabi's code, right? Which is the king stating what the laws are to do with what he feels, that individual king, and there are many of them, are the right thing to do in the circumstances for his kingdom, right? So that just just backs up the point. The codification is the law part,
Yeah.
right? And what the right thing to do is made up by the person writing it, or the person we have over in nowadays, right? The societies which go to influence the people that are writing those codes, i.e., we vote for the politicians who make our laws, who then get passed and then get affirmed by, in our case, the king, and then they get written into some kind of book or legal framework, which is different from the Americans, right? They have a constitution first, which kind of influences the shape of their
But they also have
lawmaking
penal
structure.
codes as well.
Sure, but the point being is that we have this changeable system, right? Because we don't have a constitution necessarily. We just have a history of laws, which are precedents, basically, on how people have acted previously, which then get updated by our current set of our current parliament, which is a democratic process, right? Since the 1600s or whatever.
Yeah, democratic monarchy or whatever it is that we are.
Sure.
Constitutional monarchy.
Well, that's the constitutional part, but
Yeah.
the point is the people vote for the politicians make the law, then it goes to the House of Lords to get ratified and modified, and then thrown back to the first chamber to be passed into law, and then get signed off by the monarch. Okay, so that's what I'm saying about the code. Anyway, that's the part that is important. Morality is not a set of codes as such, because there are too many for a start, and there's such a variety of different philosophical views that you can possibly hold as to whether you think they're objective or subjective, or whether you think they can be grounded or not grounded, or
a lot of people,
and that gives you many different variations on positions you can hold on morality. Some people think realism and anti-realism, and I don't even know. I don't know them because it's too conflicting for me. To me, it should be based in intuition anyway. So
a lot of the codification kind of revolves around the utility of legislation as well, doesn't it? Like, for example, is there any utility in banning murder, for example?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even wish to. I wouldn't want to talk about morality in terms of codes. That's what I'm saying here. I don't think that word is particularly useful, because code seems to imply some kind of ought. To me, it's a kind of an ought word, I guess, rather than a normative word, and that's very difficult to square.
So, what would you say morality was? Morality gives you the direct what the hell's the fucking word? Instead of being should, it gives you the this is how it is. Is that what you're saying? No, morals do?
Oh, I see. No, I mean, okay. So
surely it's the morals that's the oughts and the
point
should.
The point I'm making is that a lot of people have very different views on what morality is. Okay, but we all kind of have a sense, or an intuition, as I would call it, of a way we wish to live our lives. All right, and there are so many different philosophical views that it's very hard to say this is correct. Right, so for me, that points towards some kind of subjectivism. Okay, and it says,
and yet, it has to be.
And I feel like there's a lot of effort.
It doesn't have to be. That's the thing. None of this has to be.
Yeah, I was going to say there's an awful lot of effort that's put into changing the politics and the codification of values in countries where the moral framework differs from ours. For example, I can remember huge campaigns against various forms of subjugation in various countries over the years.
I think
Yeah,
that's one of the
That's what
things.
human rights is all about, after all.
It's a time and place thing, right? And what the different cultures saw as best at the time, or what with what they had, however you want to argue it, that's how they had to set it up. But then we also can progress a lot with bigger societies. The smaller you go back, all the way back to the tribal, the worse the problem is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the sheer number of um, frameworks that we have, I'll not use the word codes, but the frameworks that we have are so varied and dispersed because of that being our history as a species on this planet. And each group needed to establish acceptable behaviors and unacceptable behaviors just to, well, to survive at first and then to thrive second.
Are we talking about legality or morality though? Because I
We're,
feel like
we're talking about what should be done, the way you should act and behave around others versus the way you shouldn't. And obviously legislation comes in when it's time to deal with those that break those oughts and shoulds
yeah,
in
but
some way.
again, that's legality. We're talking
Yeah,
about like
exactly,
a
exactly.
code
But
that is enforced by a group. But if we're talking about morality, like my morals don't definitely in the United States don't align with what is considered legal here.
sorry, I've got cat dramas going on.
You're fine. I I'm just saying that I think that those are for I think for most people. I don't know, maybe for everyone, but those are separate entities, I guess. What is acceptable for a society is what's considered legal, but like again, my morals don't necessarily align. In a lot of cases, they do align with the legislation, but there are several instances that I can think of off the top of my head where my morals do not align with the legal code where I live.
So it would be, your view would be more that some things should be left to legality and some things should not.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but again, this is like my own personal beliefs is that like there is a line where if I think something is so immoral that yeah, at that point it should be illegal.
Yeah.
But again, that's my personal beliefs.
That I agree with you. Yeah, there's a line where some things are just part of the diversification in the society. You can't please everyone, right? So to
Right.
speak.
Well,
But
and
there's the things where everybody says, well, yeah, this here we can all agree on.
and I think that there are in most cases sort of exemptions built into the law for rare instances where, okay, overall, we would say that this is something that is wrong, that is a punishable offense, but because of extenuating circumstances or whatever, we don't consider that person guilty of said offense. And again, that falls under like legality, code of legality, but it just goes to show that like there even in like the legal statute, that's why we have the Supreme Court where they have to go and decide, hey, what does this really say? It's supposed to say it in black and white here, but is this really a punishable offense or not?
Yeah, I mean, this goes to highlight the problem, I feel. Legality and morality are not necessarily the same thing. I mean, as we've kind of said, I guess, in some description, but quite often, the legality falls behind, follows from moral precepts that the society seems to gather around, right? So there's
Yeah.
been, they have such a thing, I believe, and certainly some people in our community weigh heavily on this, that there has been moral progress over the years, right? Over the few thousand years that humans have been writing codes down, right? That's probably how we know there's been moral progress, right? It's often said that the Bible condones slavery, Leviticus and several other, Deuteronomy and several other things, and even in the New Testament, right? Paul says something about how well you should treat your slaves, for instance. Now, we don't condone that these days in certain countries, but there are still countries that have slavery, and that goes to the point of, we try to involve the world in this because all of the countries, say in the European Union, have signed and have to sign up to the Declaration of Human Rights, which is a moral code, right, which has been derived from modern philosophical thinking over the last, I don't know, 50, 60 years. I can't remember when they first started writing this down. The first code I can think of was probably after the Second World War. But it doesn't come, that code comes from a series of progresses through the Enlightenment and through philosophy, and there are many thinkers that have progressed it forward, and that's still going on today. Many people are still coming up with new ideas. So these questions about what ought to be done, right? And that's how I'm using the term moral. I think personally that morals, this is not exclusively a unilateral or univocal attitude of philosophy. Far from it. One of my points is that philosophy doesn't give you any sense of what is the right thing to do in this area, the moral system, so to speak. These things are generally agreed to be progress, right, in societies, and as they filter down through the society, then things start changing, and often the law doesn't even cover it, right? Codes don't cover it. It's just their social behavior, which we as people tend to accept, right? I guess if you were to go back, I don't know, say 70 or 80 years, right? Men having long hair was just not an accepted thing in society, right? But here we get to the 60s, and there are some bands and things that are trying to make it hip and socially acceptable to have long hair when you're a man, right? And that probably was frowned upon in society. Now, I'm not saying that that's a moral idea, but it shows that the malleability of societies over time, and that's what I'm saying. I think morality has a lot to do with is reflecting the progress that is made in thought about oughts.
Yeah, I think you had a very good point. I mean, the fact that often morality is considered as being prescriptive. It's in my opinion is because we try to define a general sense of morality into what's right and wrong, right? So I think sometimes it's like the classical case of the chicken and the egg. So if I try to apply a descriptive position to morality by saying, for example, it is generally speaking, killing somebody is frowned upon, in this community, right? In this community I'm talking about, that would be, a descriptive thing, which veers, to which might cause, a prescriptive kind of morality saying, killing is wrong. But it's sometimes it's really difficult. And again, it's the chicken and the egg. It seems to be a lot of times the morals that communities agree upon are the fruit of conversation between the persons, not necessarily the fact that they got to sit down and agree on stuff. but even an exchange of ideas. So in the example Samuel said, I mean, the long hairs, there is a conversation in the society, which brings to the fact, okay, long hairs might not be that morally reprehensible. So the community, the society as a whole, slowly changes, the moral views towards that specific topics. But the drive, to me, always seems to be a conversation, which happens upon, those societies or communities.
Well, as somebody who has experienced long hair prejudice in my younger years, I can tell you that it generally comes with the assumption of laziness attached with it, which in a lot of cases, in fact, vast majority of cases, I'd say is probably not the case. But
well, I'd love to
but
disagree, but I can't be bothered.
the thinking goes that if you can't be bothered to even cut your hair, then
So, I would argue
laziness.
that the same opinion is said for fat people. Even though if you go back again, you go back a few hundred years, fat people were like you wanted to be fat. Like that showed that you had like excess income that you could spend on money on food that you didn't necessarily need to eat to survive. But yeah, now fat people are considered lazy, which again, I would argue that most fat people are not lazy. But
Well, I mean, they put a lot of effort in eating, so they can't be that lazy, right? So, yeah.
well, and they put a lot of effort into like moving their body around too.
Well, that not so much, but yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, for instance, and my grandmother, I loved my grandmother. She was over 300 pounds when she died. The amount of effort that it took for her to get that body to the bathroom before she peed herself was a lot more than the effort that it takes for me. It takes me a fraction of the amount of effort.
That is very true. That is very true. Anyway, yeah, just to throw a little wrench in, as I'm prone to do. Earlier on, Fabio, you mentioned death penalty and how abhorrent the thinking in Italy is with regards to death penalty. Somebody in chat brought up, or a couple of people in chat mentioned that the death penalty is still legal in some states in the US, and there are other parts of the world where the death penalty is legal. But the spanner I'm going to throw in is with regards the air quote social morality, the public opinion, as it were, from which the legislation ultimately derives as it sort of filters down, as you were describing. A couple of people have described.
Yeah.
And that is the pharmacist CEO shooting, and what's his name, Luigi Mangione, and a lot of people being prepared to give him a pass because of the air quote service he did for humanity, with regards bringing to light what that particular insurance company was doing with people's lives. Basically executed him.
So the death penalty. Oh, sorry, Bino. Go ahead.
And I agree. I'm just throwing this in as a wrench, as a wrinkle to the discussion, because a lot of people are saying Mangione was justified. Obviously, the law and it probably a much larger group of people are saying no, he needs to face the legal ramifications of what he's done. But there is that group of people that say, yeah, he was justified in doing what he did.
So speaking as someone who lives in one of those states where the death penalty is legal, and I would say that for the most part, the population here is supportive of the death penalty. It is not something that is not socially acceptable. It is very much socially supported. The opinion that I have heard is, yes, that Mangione was justified in what he did, but that he still deserves the death penalty because that's the law. And I think that that's an interesting take. But
Interesting take.
I
Yeah.
have absolutely heard that from multiple people.
He was justified, but he still deserves to die.
Right.
Interesting point.
So the death penalty thing is actually interesting because in most of the Western and civilized countries there is no death penalty, and the funny thing is that you can actually trace it back to some specific events, arguments, and books. Specifically, it comes, from, in general, from Illuminism in France, but there are some very peculiar points. And the most famous of them is a script by an Italian philosopher, Cesare Beccaria, on crime and punishments, where he argued, in a nutshell, that death penalty should not be allowed in a society because we want the society to be better than any single individual. So society as a whole should be better than any single individual. So if I receive a very major offense, it might be understandable that I want to kill somebody, but as a society, he argued that we should be better than the single instance. That single, that precise thing, just spread like wildfire in most of the Western, countries. Funnily enough, Cesare Beccaria was very well regarded by some of the founding fathers in the U.S. Not enough, I would argue, but that's that's another point. But it's weird because this goes back to what I was trying to say before. That is something which is morally accepted right now in most of the countries, which sprouted by a philosophical conversation and exchange of ideas between people, which slowly crept into the old society.
I think that that's the main driver for moral progress, right? So I can't remember who it was that came up with this, but there was something along the lines, and hopefully somebody out there will know, to say, it's rather that we set 10 guilty men free rather than imprison one innocent man.
Yes.
Right? So that kind of moral consequentialism, as has been put in the chat by someone which I just read, Phantom, that's the kind of driver that then seeps in. And, well, what are the consequences of that? What are the inferences that we can make from that kind of logic or logical argument to influence our society in a more progressive manner, at least to move things forward as to how we empathetically feel about each other? And that's, for me, where morals come from, right? This idea of empathy and bonding that we have for other people, and larger groups seems to be the moral progress, right? So that's another thing we could talk about. Go ahead, Dave.
I think we've done that, right? Speaking of like the death penalty, there used to be death penalty for a lot of things, and now it's mostly reserved for the most heinous things, right? So give an example like Jesus. In the time of Jesus, you give a Roman a funny look, and that's it. You know what I mean? You could have swift justice right there on the street, or put up on a stick, right? Now, pretty much in freer societies, we can walk around with our signs, right? And we can protest and everything, and come right up to the so-called Roman officer, police officer, what it would be nowadays, and hold your sign right in their face, and you're not going to get the death penalty for it, hopefully.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting because, like if you look at the Code of Hammurabi, there's remarkably few death penalties on it. Right? You could do physical damage to somebody, and you still don't get, a thing, although it's set up like, what we would consider immorally today, because it's not equal rights, right? And that's a key.
You go to
That's a
Yeah,
key
you go-
step forward. That's a key step forward in the Enlightenment. Go ahead.
Yeah, like going back to an old Western, right? All you had to do was call somebody yellow, and you could go out and shoot the other person, and they would say, "Oh, it's justified," and everybody was, good with it. Nowadays, again, we don't want people to pacing, 20 steps and firing and to solve their problems. So, again, these things, especially when it comes to taking someone's life, I think that definitely has evolved as to, prisons and then prison reform and parole and, on down the line that we've definitely progressed on what we think is worthy of unaliving someone.
I'm just going to look up when dueling was actually outlawed. That quote was attributed to Sir William Blackstone from Commentaries on the Laws of England, 1765 to 1769.
Sorry,
and there's some
1655.
1765.
And you can see the honor in it, and going and settling your things, but in the big picture, that's not how we should be doing things. So these things, what is again acceptable, step out back. You call me yellow, and nowadays it's like no, and our laws reflect that, right? It doesn't matter if somebody called you a name, you can't unalive them because they called you a name.
But in the big picture, you can. World War II, that was what was fought, the duel between good and bad. So it still happens, but it just happens on a much grander scale. That's all.
That's quite interesting. That's an interesting point, I feel. Let me just expand on what I mean by that, which is to say that dueling was outlawed generally speaking, in the 18th century, at least anyway. It was outlawed during times of war. So if your country was at war, then it was strictly forbidden, presumably because that a lot of military people got involved in it. Also, just to say that dueling between classes was frowned upon. So if you were a commoner, you couldn't offer a duel. It was illegal to offer a duel to somebody of an aristocratic status. And
personally, I smile on dueling between classes.
Also between ranks as well. Even when you weren't at war, you weren't allowed to offer duels between ranks. So it's a very strictly. It became a very strictly, enforced kind of code, to use the word of the day. A lot of the later period of military history in Europe, even when everybody was, slicing each other to bits in 100 Years' Wars and things.
Got some interesting dates. 1844, British Army formally outlawed dueling amongst officers, and public dueling. There was a decline during the 19th century, and by 1850s it was effectively ended due to public criticism. The last fatal duel in England was 1852, and that was between two Frenchmen in Southsea. In the US, early 1800s, dueling was common in the South, and particularly amongst political figures. Kentucky and Virginia in 1801 and 1810 respectively passed some of the earliest anti-dueling laws. Many states required public officials to swear they had never participated in a duel, and the US military outlawed dueling for officers under the Articles of War 1806. And the last notable political duel over on your land was 1859 between the US Congressman Daniel Sickles and Philip Barton Key, and he was acquitted. And it faded out generally after the Civil War. So there you go. Interesting stuff.
So Phantom says the last duel in the UK didn't involve a UK citizen.
No. Two Frenchmen.
Yeah. I wonder what it was over, though. You know, I wonder what one of the
Probably
guys,
some English woman.
one of the guys said. Yeah, right. Probably how shit the beer was.
Probably had given it its South Sea, yeah.
Or maybe that, or the cheese being bland. One or the
Or
other.
the jellied eels.
Okay, yeah. Okay, well, there are clearly moral statements that are self-contradictory. So there's definitely an objective moral incorrectness. I love that line of thinking. Piper, what do
That
you
is
think of
really
that?
good.
that
That is
Probably the
really
most
good.
accurate thing that's been said so far.
What do I think of what, sir?
This statement? Well, there are clearly moral statements that are self-contradictory. So there is definitely an objective moral incorrectness.
That's it's probably the most straightforward argument for moral realism I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. I mean, could you just explain what moral realism is? Maybe let's go basic.
Yeah, moral realism is the view that moral facts exist independently of the attitudes of people. So regardless of what my opinion is or your opinion is or somebody over in Columbia's opinion is or whatever, there are some things that are just true about the moral domain. That's the basic idea.
Can you give us an example of one of those?
Like something that would be morally true, like a moral fact.
Yeah, or what's proposed under moral realism.
Yeah, so you might think that, a popular one is it just is wrong always and forever, no matter what anybody thinks about it, to torture an infant for fun.
Okay, and how would you discover that that's true or not?
So it's an area of philosophy called metaethics, and there are different ways you can do philosophy, but one part of it is trying to figure out what is being gestured at when people make moral pronouncements, right? So when I say that it's wrong to torture an infant for fun, what exactly am I saying about the world? And so we can do an investigation to figure that out. And so people will advance various arguments based on the meaning of statements like that, based on whether they're culturally relative or not, based on basically all that kind of stuff.
But surely,
Yeah,
surely what you're describing there is just mere speculation about a proposition. The proposition about torturing babies, and then people speculating about it. That's not going to bring any kind of truth to the statement. It's just going to bring opinion, surely.
Well, I don't know why it would be speculation any more than other arguments about, what's right and wrong or speculation. Is it speculation to say, listen to this example, right? So is it speculation to say, oh, you shouldn't torture an infant for fun because, that hurts the infant and it's not really, doesn't really, the pleasure you get from it doesn't really compensate for that. All right, is that speculation or is that reasoning?
Well,
What if a God orders it?
Speculation within a very narrow parameter. I mean, once
No,
other
Dave.
things that could be taken into consideration and situations that we are completely unaware of arising, how can you proclaim it as being a truth of any kind?
Well, the reason that
Your position, by the
people
way, I'm
would
just
normally
that's strange.
the reason that people would normally proclaim it as a truth is because of the things like the reasoning I just gave, right? Or like, when you explain to a 5-year-old, hey, you shouldn't do this because it affects other people in X, Y, and Z way, right? I mean, I don't think that's stuff speculation.
Well,
can we just sorry to jump in there, because I think there's a lot of back and forth that can go here without clarifying terms. So metaphysical, what did you say? Yeah, metaphysical justification. That's kind of saying, is that and correct me when I'm wrong here, Piper, please. Is that saying that there is some kind of grounding right? Or assuming that there is a grounding for any particular view, moral view in this case. And that justification obviously is a difficult thing to do, but not impossible, regardless of whether you're a theist or an atheist. Many people think that there's a grounding to numbers, for instance, right?
Mhm.
A sort of a Platonist kind of
Right.
version. And the other thing you pointed to was giving some kind of, I guess it's normative standard by which we judge the case,
Right.
right? And that is different from this metaphor because the normative standard doesn't assume that it is grounded.
Right. So there's a bunch of different levels to moral philosophy. So there's applied ethics, which is like debates about whether we should allow abortion or whether we should allow gay marriage or blah blah blah, that kind of stuff, right? Then there's normative ethics, which is trying to formulate, as you say, the standards that would allow us to judge in any particular situation what the right conclusion about right and wrong is, right? And then there's metaethics, which is about, okay, what do people mean when they say, moral statements? And as you were talking about before, the metaphysics of it, which is, okay, what's the nature of this stuff that people are talking about when they talk about right and wrong? Does it even exist? That kind of thing.
Okay, that's clearer. So I was wrong in that sense.
Can I just point something out about philosophers of ethics? It's in 15 minutes or less. I think it's like Godwin's rule. They will start talking about torturing babies. So I'm always concerned that philosophers use that example so often.
Yeah,
Well,
I thought
I can tell you
Godwin's
why they do
rule
that.
was discussing, bringing up
I can
the
tell you
Nazi
why, too.
period.
Well, the reason
Because
reason
everybody's
they do
going to
that-
agree with them. Everybody will agree
Well, it's
with
not
them.
necessarily that everyone will agree with them. The point is, the reason they do that is to take a clear case in which most people already agree
Right.
that it's wrong to
Right.
do, and then to make
Yeah.
some argument from there. But it's not. It doesn't just assume agreement with whatever's
But-
being said at the outset.
But what about the babies, man?
hang
I
on.
just worry about them.
It's also.
I think
It's
that
also-
the real miracle. I think that the real miracle was that we were able to talk about morality for 48 minutes without mentioning God, and the only and it was only
Dave
mentioned as a
mentioned them.
joke. Yeah, but it wasn't mentioned as a joke. So yeah, it's just
Yeah,
technically
okay,
48
Dave
minutes, but carry on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But
that was
Go on.
let's say it as not a joke.
Well, that's
at
a
the moment,
miracle.
then.
Yeah.
Let's bring it in as a non-joke, which is to say it's an example which a lot of theists will use because they believe that they have an objective standard, even if they can't explain, the standard itself, and therefore they want to try and use an intuition pump as best they can to really put the atheist under strain because they feel. And I guess this is an overgeneralization, but nevertheless, I'm going to do it. That atheists can't have a grounding, right? Because they're just all they believe in is, I don't know, particles or something, right? And how can particles have any kind of moral standing? So therefore, atheists must be immoral. I guess that's the argument.
Whoa.
Well, I'm not saying it's true, but I'm saying
whoa,
it seems to be an overgeneralization
whoa.
of the theist
Somebody,
community at lower levels, at least.
That wasn't even
Somebody-
a jump. It was a fucking leap to the moon, man. I mean, the fact that I haven't got a foundation, blah, 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 ergo, you're wrong. I mean, what the actual fuck, right? I mean,
Yeah, but you must have had a debate with a theist where they said, "Oh, yeah, but you're just an
Oh,
atheist."
man, listen, I spoke with Otangelo enough times that I know exactly what you're talking about. But still, I mean, that doesn't make it any brighter or smarter. It's just
Yeah, I
a bunch
agree.
of bollocks.
Well,
I think the first time I had-
if God orders it, it's moral in
Yeah.
or morally justified or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the first time I had a Christian look me dead in the eyes and say, "Well, then you're going to hell for not believing in Jesus," was when I was 12 or 13. So,
Yeah,
I feel like
mean,
that is
it's yeah. I mean,
it's
from
a
the other side,
generalization, but
it
it's
seems slightly strange, and I agree. But nonetheless, that
That
moral
in
argument,
itself
or
is
the
immoral.
argument, the argument from morality is a strong argument which theists make, right? I mean, I'm not saying there are any good ones that they make, but
Well,
it's
the moral
not
argument
one
isn't
of the
a
worst,
strong
is it?
argument.
I
Okay,
have
yeah,
heard
no.
it.
The moral argument for God's existence is probably the worst argument for the existence of God, because there
Yes.
simply is no inference from the morality being stance independent that therefore some supernatural being that created the universe exists. There simply isn't an inference one can make either deductively or inductively. there just isn't.
Correct.
And this is why, like, serious logicians and philosophers will tell you it's just a horrible argument.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think personally, as an atheist, I think they're all horrible. It's I'm just saying it's not as horrible as some
Not
others,
wrong.
and I guess that's
I
subjective
struggle to
view.
think of
That's
an
a
argument
subjective
for
view.
God that is worse than the moral argument. Perhaps the ontological argument,
Yeah,
but
that's
outside of that, I don't think that any of the other arguments
isn't
are
the
worse.
tag worse than the moral argument?
Honestly, no, I don't think so.
Tag as well.
Because
Tag as well.
at least there's some base level inference that they can try to make that's at least valid. That doesn't make it sound, but at least it's valid. Whereas
Well, I
I
mean,
don't
you can
really
put,
think-
you can. I mean, William Lane Craig puts his crappy moral argument in a valid syllogism as well. I mean, you know.
Yeah, it's a valid syllogism. Sure, that doesn't mean anything to me though. Validity is.
Well, that's what I'm
extremely low
saying,
bar
right?
for me.
Both of them,
Yeah.
both of them can be put into valid syllogisms, and it seems to me like they're, you know, they're both
Yeah,
terrible.
anyway.
Tag is a little
Yeah.
bit worse. I don't know. Go ahead.
I think, and Pascal's wager, I feel, is a little bit worse as well. At least there's an intuition pump with the moral argument, right? We've all got to engage with morals
I
at
don't
some
get
level,
it.
whatever our stance is, we've got to have a stance, right?
I don't think you do. Number one, I think that there are certain things that for whatever reason somebody may just not have a stance on. But I don't get an intuition pump from the moral argument. Of course, I
Okay.
reject this notion that like morality being stance independent, which is clearly false. I reject that that's in any way, shape, or form intuitive. And as Lance Bush has pointed out multiple times, when there's actual studies done on just regular normal people, that doesn't actually seem to be the kinds of intuitions that people have about morality.
No. You misunderstood. If you thought I meant that the intuition was for objective morality, then that's not what I was saying. I was saying the intuition is to have a moral stance of some point, of some way, right? I mean, you can't just, unless you're a psychopath or a sociopath, you can't really go around the world thinking that there's no morals or there are no moral standards to which you ought do something.
I think
right?
somebody
even if your moral system doesn't include oughts, right? You still have to bend to society's will in some way.
I mean, there are views like error theory and non-cognitivism where the person that holds them basically doesn't affirm the truth of any moral propositions. So, I mean,
yeah. No, I agree that there are moral positions which hold that the truth of such a statement is either completely subjective or unfounded, and therefore whatever the conclusion is. But what I'm saying is, when you get out into the real world, you'll get slapped down very hard.
I mean, you have to have a pragmatic engagement.
You
have to have a pragmatic engagement with like issues of like, social norms or whatever, right? But there are a lot of people who think, like intelligent philosophers like John Mackey, who think, well, look, that's all it is. There's not really a reality to that, but whatever.
Okay. I did not know that he had that position, actually.
Yeah, he was the pioneer of error theory.
Based on something you just said there, Simos, I'd like to throw in a little word that may have some foundation as to whether or not somebody's going to have an appropriate feels reaction to being presented with a moral question, for example, and I'm going to cite him again. Is the death penalty a good thing or a bad thing? Somebody's going to have a reaction to that, and I would say that their reaction is probably going to be founded on whether or not they have a sense of empathy and how developed it is. And you could apply that to sexual moralities, mores, just general social mores, behavior in public. It's going to be based on an empathetic reaction to, well, what if it were done to me? What if I were to see it being done to somebody else?
Okay, so I will preface this by saying that I personally don't believe in the death penalty. I do live in an area where, again, the death penalty is legal. I don't necessarily see it as a lack of empathy, people who do believe in the death penalty. I think that it's more of a choice to have empathy for like the families of the victims as opposed to having empathy for the perpetrator. And yeah, I don't necessarily think that they don't have empathy. I think that they look at it differently. And also I think there is this sort of overshadowed factor of that they believe, well, okay, this person's going to be on death row. They're going to be given time. They're mostly all very religious people. They will be given time to repent for their sins. And like the example that I'm thinking of is Clifford Bogus, who like recorded like tracks of like playing Hold Me Jesus while he was on death row. And Christians believe that he is in heaven. Like he repented for his sins. Yeah, he killed multiple people, but like he found God when he was on death row. And to them, it's like you're offering them some sort of solace in that way, as opposed to like being life in prison. But yeah, I disagree on that. Again, still disagree with the death penalty, but I don't necessarily think that people who disagree with me are lacking empathy.
Okay,
I'd like to welcome in Snake Was Right.
Right, good to have you here. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Hello.
You've been
thanks for
listening for
having
a
me.
while. Is there anything you wish to just add at this time, or?
I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely a moral realist, but an atheist. So I've been kind of dropping some stuff in the chat.
Yep.
Explain that. Explain what's real about morals.
It's just all. How do I approach that question? It's basically logical truth.
Okay.
So there's correctness in moral statements. So, I guess you would have to start with defining good or should. That's usually where I start.
Well, how about define correctness? What makes correctness?
True.
What is it? What is it
Real.
in reality? Okay, true and real. Okay.
Something can be true subjectively. Like it's true that vanilla ice cream is the best ice cream in the world for me, because I actually do believe that. So truth doesn't entail objectivity.
Yeah, truth isn't
objective truth.
around. Truth isn't floating around independent of propositions. So,
of course not.
I don't know.
Truth is a feature of languages.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that. I guess there's other views, right? Because like when you think about things being true, there's an association, like Dillahunty would say, that which comports to reality, and obviously reality is not dependent upon language.
Assuming one takes a correspondence theory of truth, I would reject the correspondence theory of truth. I hold to some sort of probably deflationary style notion of truth, where truth is just.
Could you explain that for us, Leo?
So I think snow is white is in quotes is true if out of quotes snow is white. So I just take truth to be sort of this disquotational feature of languages. It's not some special esoteric concept that humans have struggled to under. No, truth is a property of languages. If we didn't have languages, the concepts of truth wouldn't exist. rather than truth
right,
being
but-
merely some sort of correspondence to the physical world. Because in that instance, if truth is correspondence to reality, I don't know what it would mean to say that it's true that Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead.
Well, because the author wrote that Harry Potter has a
Yeah,
scar.
but
on
Harry
his
Potter
head.
is not in reality. So there
Yeah,
wouldn't
but
be
the
anything for
author
that
is.
truth to correspond to, in virtue of which it could be true. So I don't know what would make the statement Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead true if there's nothing in reality for it to correspond to under the correspondence theory of truth.
Well, I mean, the correspondence is, of course, that the author wrote that as
But
part
it's
of the story.
correspondence to reality.
Well, reality is the author
And there
writing.
is no Harry Potter in reality.
Yeah,
so
but
what
the
is the
author,
statement?
the truth is the fact that the author wrote that.
Okay,
Right, that's
but there's
true
nothing
in reality.
that what was wrote is corresponding to. That's the issue.
No, the statement is corresponding to what the author wrote.
No, the
And
statement
the
is
author
what
wrote,
was written.
What?
The statement is what the author wrote. That Harry
that's
Potter
right.
has
That's
a scar
what's-
on his
that's
forehead.
what's true about
But there
reality.
not anything in reality that statement that was wrote corresponds
Oh,
to.
okay. Okay,
So
I see.
again, under a,
It's not
and
a
again,
boot.
this is under a correspondence theory. I don't know what it would mean to say that Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead is true. Even though I think most people, at least those familiar with the series, would say that is a true statement. It is true that Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead.
Well, it's true that it was written that Harry Potter has a scar on
Well,
his
I would say that it is true that Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead. That is the proposition. Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead is a true proposition.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can get my head around that exactly, but
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that.
but Piper,
Well,
Oh.
there is a slight counter to that, slight pushback in that, in order for somebody to evaluate whether or not the statement Spock can enter somebody else's mind is true or not, you have to presuppose the entire Star Trek universe. So things can be contextually true without being literally true.
Of course.
So I just wanted to throw that in before we moved on.
yeah.
So back to Snake. So Snake, you're saying something like there is a logical necessity to some morals, like they're logically necessary.
So it's basically that there are phenomena that happen, good and bad are phenomena that are real objective phenomena.
How do I find those phenomena? How would I
They're
find them?
mostly interactions between things.
Between what kind of things?
Well, anything.
Rocks? Rocks?
Sure. Yep.
Wait, so is
Yeah,
this
so-
like
Okay,
a T-jump
interaction.
style of morality?
Oh, what?
Is this like a T-jump style of morality where non-agential physical objects can engage morally? So like
No.
it's immoral for the rock to fall off the cliff and hit you on the head because, as at least as T-jump would say, that's an involuntary imposition of your will. We're not going down a road like that, are we? Because
and I've
just think
debated
that's
him on.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I've debated him on that, and
Okay.
so no, but it is bad. It is objectively bad for a rock to hit you, but I wouldn't.
What do you mean
I
by
wouldn't say
bad?
it's immoral.
Okay, but
Bad?
Leo, you brought humans into it. We're just talking about two rocks. Okay.
Well, I don't recall bringing humans. I don't understand that. I was just asking, what does it mean? To say
You
it's
said
bad
fall
for a
on
rock?
somebody's head. That brings humans into it.
Well,
You're-
no,
you're
it could
bringing
be, it,
humans
it, it could be something that's not a human. It could be an alien.
Okay, it fell on an alien's head. Okay, then you're bringing organisms into
Well,
it.
but
or
that's
you're
not
bringing
that
intelligence.
whole issue. That's neither here nor there. That
Well,
was
don't
part
do
of an
that. Let's just
example
talk about
when I
two
was
rocks.
talking-
Let's just-
and that's well, I don't want to talk about rocks. I want to talk about what it means to say that something is bad.
Yeah, well, that's what you want to talk about. So, but
Because the
Snake,
word "bad"
you
was
said
used. I want to know what it means to say that. Because I'm not following. I don't know what is being, what sorts of concepts I should have when we say that it's bad that a rock falls on your head.
It
well, what if rock
reduces
falls on
the
another
amount
rock?
of qualities in the system.
What are these, like, physical quantities that we're looking at?
Qualities.
Qualities. What do we mean by
Qualities.
qualities?
Any property of an object or system.
property. What's a
I'm
property?
confused. So electric charge is a property of an electron. Is that good or bad?
That's good.
In virtue, so what do you mean when you say it's good?
It's well, I get all these definitions from the dictionary, so I'm not just
well, the
making
dictionary is
stuff up.
probably not a good source for trying to understand
Well, it's
ethics
just
and things like
that this is everyday usage of the words, and I'm not just making up my own definition just to have my thing be true by this whatever definition.
Well,
so
from
good means having a role required, or having qualities required for a specific role. That's all it means, and
Yeah,
that's
I
what it
don't even know
means
what that
in
means.
morality, and that's how what you can reduce.
I don't
it
think
to when
that's what it
anyone's-
means in morality.
Well,
at all. I think
would
very few moral philosophers.
I would
would agree
debate
with
you on that because I think if you interrogate anyone's morality down to what their core intuition or whatever it is, they're talking about increasing the functionality of society or something like that.
Well, that comes down to then I'm just going to ask, what do you mean by functionality? And I'm going to ask why we should strive for that. I think what it means to say that
that's a
something
different
is
question.
good is just to say that it ought to occur, all things considered. And to say that something is bad is to say that it ought not to occur, all things considered.
What does
I
ought
think
mean?
almost all moral philosophers take a normative approach to what I mean by good and bad.
Well, what does
The
ought
good and
mean?
bad are given in terms of oughts, what ought or ought not be done, usually, though not always, all things considered.
What does ought mean?
Ought is going to refer to some given obligation.
Okay, so that's I think that's an objective statement that can be measured.
How do you measure it?
And ought, so ought is basically just, so you said one synonym is obligation. So either it's a logical obligation or it's like a physical obligation.
I
Like
don't know
the
what a
rock.
logical obligation would be.
Can
True.
I Snake? Can I pose
Mhm.
you a hypothetical example that you can talk us through, so that you can illustrate your point better, maybe?
Sure.
Okay. Ought that lion eat me if I am foolish enough to open my door?
For the lion, sure, yeah.
Oh, that doesn't sound like objective morality.
Ought.
Yeah, but that's not a moral outcome that
no.
is
So
positive.
yeah,
to me
no.
in
I
any
would
way.
say, on an objective level, no. The lion should not eat you. It probably will.
But why?
Why? Because having a dead person is less qualities in the universe.
Less
Yeah,
of
but
what
it
qualities?
means food for that lion and his.
Yeah, but the lion
pride,
can
that
get food
way.
elsewhere.
Yeah, but
By
I'm
doing the
there
same thing
now.
it's doing to you, so.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be a human. It's better if it kills an animal.
Yeah, but what makes it better that it kills a gazelle, say?
A
versus
human is an animal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a non-human
I'm
animal. Because a gazelle
Well,
has
actually,
less
Behold, the chicken!
qualities than a human.
Because what?
A
I'm
gazelle
sorry, I
has
didn't catch
less qualities than a human does.
that. Less of what kinds of qualities?
Any qualities.
I disagree.
I don't. We
It
have
can
about
run
the same
better
amount
than
of
I
physical
can,
qualities,
but it
but we
can't
have.
write a symphony.
What'd you say?
It can run better than I can, but it can't write a symphony.
Okay. Well, I can think better than it can,
So,
and I
what
can.
makes that better than otherwise?
Because it can do a lot more than running can.
What do you mean by that?
It can also
Humans
be
can
very
use their
tasty.
intelligence to accomplish a lot more than running a little bit faster.
Okay, what makes that better than running?
By definition, because it's more
By,
qualities.
by what definition?
The dictionary definition, the
Well,
objective.
I don't use dictionaries. I use like.
Well, then that's the
the
English
philosophical
definition of
literature.
objective good.
Well,
you can play
dictionaries don't actually give you definitions for words. They tell you how words are used.
Right.
That
That's
doesn't-
how good is used. I'm feeling good.
Not
Brushing your
in
teeth is
morality,
good.
It's not.
Well, that's how it's. Yeah, that is how it's used.
Brushing your teeth is good in virtue of what?
I
That
sort of
increases the
doubt.
function of your mouth.
I sort of doubt that
Increases
this
the-
is
but what makes that
actually.
good?
I didn't hear
mean,
any of this.
Here's Simus.
I sort of doubt that the definition you're talking about is actually used in the I sort of doubt the definition you're talking about is actually used in the dictionary.
It is. It's word for word from the dictionary.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
which dictionary?
From I think it's Oxford. I can check.
Okay, go check.
Yep.
I would put
And
forward
I've
the edge
seen
case
stuff like it
that,
in every dictionary. I've checked.
that it's probably more advantageous for the planet for the lion to eat the human, because there are far more humans than there are gazelle.
For
I just
The
wanted
planet?
to clarify the point that I
Yeah,
was
if
getting
we're
at
looking at
is
the overall,
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
I
Well,
think
the
the
I agree with
impact
that.
is
Okay.
I
There's a
think the
lot.
impact is pretty negligible if you take out a person as far as like environmental impact.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly the point. If you take out a gazelle, you're going to have a much greater effect on the environment.
Right, but
Yeah, but
which is
what
more
makes that
beneficial
effect
to the
better than
planet
any
as a
other
whole
effect?
hang on
to
a minute,
take
guys.
out a
Hang on.
human than it would be to take out a
Yeah,
gazelle.
sure. Agreed, right? That you can look at it from that particular perspective.
Yeah,
But
I'm just trying
like
to
we're
look at it
saying,
as the
these are all.
overall good.
Yeah,
I
I
don't.
get
I
you.
think
But
that's.
hang on, Snake. Hang on, Snake. But we still got to say that these are kind of, I don't know, these are standards by which we're going to judge what we think is ethical or morals, right? And that's not the question under debate. We can come up with many different standards, right? And
I
many
know this
philosophers
was
have
just
come
an
out with.
example to help
I know,
help get to the nub of
I know.
what's
But
Snake's
I
saying.
think what Leo's trying to get to, and I would agree with him if this is the point, is what is the standard that you're saying is the
Not quite.
grounding for your morality, Snake? Okay.
So at this
So-
point, I would just like to say that Hume's is ought distinction has entered the chat because that
Yeah,
relates to
Hume
what
was
I'm getting
wrong.
at. See, well, no, he wasn't.
Absolutely. In
Well,
every way.
so I'm going to ask this after
That's
I
my
get done
hot
saying
take.
what I'm saying. So the thing is
Okay.
like
We'll
good
get you
and
to explain
bad
it,
and
alright.
better than and worse than and the best and this is normative language. This is the language of what ought, not what is. And there's a difference between those kinds of statements. The fact that the sun emits electromagnetic radiation tells you nothing about whether the sun ought to emit electromagnetic radiation. I would say that with respect to the sun, that's kind of a pointless question to ask because the sun isn't a moral agent. It's not normative. Normativity is the problem here. And this is what I think a lot of people, like T-Jump especially, miss about the moral discussion. You can't take from the way that something is and tell me how it ought to be. That's just never going to work.
I think that's
And
wrong.
every question that I ask, oh, well, it's better to eat a gazelle than a human because humans can think. Okay, what makes thinking better than what a gazelle can do? Well, because I'm a human and I can do those. Okay, so those are your reasons why you think it's better.
That wasn't my
But
reason.
these things do not come from the way the world is. What we think about morality, the ways that we think we ought or ought not behave, do not come from the way the world is.
Okay,
What
great.
What do you mean by
Hang
ought?
on before we go on, right? That's very clearly stated. Thank you, Leo. And obviously, the distinction Hume makes between ought and is has been a running debate, I guess.
It's not been a debate though amongst philosophers.
Some people do debate it. I'm not saying it's not generally accepted as the majority view here. I'm just saying there are outliers. Many theists,
Yeah, but not a
I
lot.
would say, would say that God is a part of the universe and we ought to do what God says, right? So many theists, I guess, would disagree with what Hume is saying. However, we got an atheist here, maybe two, right? Speed. You were saying that Hume was confused, so let's just hear the other side. I don't know what you're pointing at, Brian.
But before they state their case, can they tell
Yeah.
me what the distinction is, just so that we're all on the same page and we all know
I
that
gotcha.
we're understanding what the distinction actually is?
Down
Okay,
to
so
Mike.
So there is no
yeah, Mike's
distinction.
somewhere else on the street.
I think Hume
Well,
was
you
wrong.
tell me what
The
Hume's
problem with
Hume's
Hume-
distinction was. I
You've
want
been
to make
asked
sure
for
that
what-
you
The problem-
understand it.
The
Yeah.
problem is that the Humean side of things doesn't have a definition for ought. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it does.
Once you define it, the act of defining it shows you that all oughts are is statements, and thus the
Well,
distinction
I don't know what that
collapses.
means.
Okay, well let's hear it out here. Snake, if you want to just give us a quick, or as quick as you can, like sentences on what you mean by what you're saying now, and I also want to bring Mike in here because he also might agree with you. Different
So-
perspective.
No, you don't.
Okay. Let's hear the other side anyway, is what I'm asking.
Do it.
Go ahead,
So,
Snake.
I mean,
Go ahead.
there was a lot to address in what Leo was saying. So I would
Right, just the
I
one
would-
specific point first about this
Okay.
distinction between the is and the ought. What do
You
you
want me to-
perceive as
you want me to
why
steal
is
me
there
on the
no?
position?
Well, no, I just if you can, and then also if you can tell me why you think that all ought statements can be reduced to an is statement anyway. And I'm guessing that you're going to bring in particular terms, but let's just say this difference between normative and metaethical. I want to know about.
Yeah, so there would basically the stance is that there's a non-overlapping space where there are things that can be described, and then there are which are is statements, and then there are oughts, which is just something else entirely. And I always kind of was a little shaky with that because I never was able to wrap my head around how do you even describe what an ought is then.
Sure.
And
Okay, can we
trying
just
to do that, I came to my current position, which is that
Right.
if you actually describe what an ought is, these are all objectively measurable phenomena that happen in the
Right.
world. So there is no distinction.
Well, they happen in the past, I guess. But
Sure.
but when you're talking about ought statements, you're talking about future. So there seems to be some. What you ought do is obviously a future statement. That's
I think you can boil it down to ought is just a statement that something is good.
right. But
in
what
the- in the moral
what the hell
sense.
does good mean? Right?
Yeah, well,
That's going to be
So-
circular, right?
So the problem always comes to, well, I don't accept that definition of good. Well, fine, I don't care. There is a phenomenon that I'm describing that is objectively measurable, and it happens, and
Right.
we can quibble over like exactly what quantity, like there's where the debate is. It's like, well, is there more of an environmental impact if we get rid of one human versus a gazelle? That's a fine debate, but that doesn't get to any contradiction in the overall theory. So,
Sure.
so you can call it good or you can call it schmud or whatever you want, but the phenomenon I'm describing is real, and it's what people use on a day-to-day basis to actually talk about when they're talking about something was good, something,
Right.
or just morality. Like, this is a good thing to do.
Right, but
Lines
you're
up
not
with
really
the phenomenon I'm describing.
sure. But you're not telling me why an ought statement is the same as an is statement.
Well, if
That's
if
even
good
makes
is
sense.
if good is
Maybe I'm
something,
being, maybe I'm equivocating on the word is there, but
so if we accept good, then an ought is in his statement. Obligation.
Sure, that word good is an ought statement by definition. You're just
You're trying to
introducing a
separate the word
standard.
good from the word ought, and it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I mean that's what we're trying to do.
Well,
We're
no,
trying to
'cause-
say, give me an is statement, right?
If you define good as
which has an or outcome.
if you define good as something you should do and should as something that's good, then that's a
Right.
circular problem. But
Yeah,
that's
but-
not how I.
Yeah, but okay. So let me put it this way: if we use an is statement, in order to get an ought conclusion, you're going to need another premise, and that premise is going to have to include an ought term, right? it's gonna have to
not
say
if you
something like-
substitute what
It's gonna
ought
have to
actually
say-
means.
Say again.
Not if you actually just substitute what ought it is actually describing.
Well, yeah, okay. You could redefine ought into an is statement, but that's not really addressing the problem, is it?
Well, I would say you
Because-
translate it. You just paraphrase
Yeah,
it.
but how do you translate it? You translate it by another premise, and if you analyze that premise, it's going to have a word in it, which is necessarily an ought type word, right? Which is going to give you some prediction of how you should be acting, in short, right? And it's just going to say something like it is wrong to do X, right? And wrong is the word which is being substituted for ought.
Well,
In this
wrong.
case, ought not, right? You ought not do something that's wrong. Okay.
Well, wrong is just incorrect, and incorrectness can be measured.
Sure,
what do
but
you
in
mean
the-
by incorrect?
Not true.
So you think that actions have truth value?
Yeah.
What does it mean to say it's false to murder somebody? I don't.
There are
Actions
logical
aren't
contradictions in
propositions.
the act of murder because you're saying
No,
I
there's
have the
not.
right
If there were
to.
logical contradictions in the act of murder, murder could not obtain. Murder obtains all the time.
No,
There's
it's not a
nothing
physical.
logically
It's not a
contradictory
physical
about it.
contradiction, but it is logically. It's the
No,
same.
it's not.
You can
logical
say.
contradiction.
Yes,
Do you know
it
what it
is.
means to be logically impossible? What does it mean for something to be
I didn't say
logically
that.
impossible?
I didn't say that.
You just
I
said
said-
logical contradiction, right?
So
that
I
means
can
logically
state-
impossible. To
Nope.
say that something's a logical contradiction is to say that it's logically impossible.
Leo, I
what
can
does it
write
mean to
2
say
plus
that something
2?
is logically impossible?
I can write 2 + 2 = 5, and I can say it, and I can write it on my math test, and it's a
Yeah,
logical
and it's not
contradiction,
logically
and I
impossible
just still did
for
it.
2 + 2 = 5. That's not logically impossible.
It is
No, it's not.
by the
Go ask any
definition of 2.
mathematician.
Yeah.
Simus,
what
do you want
is-
to take this here and
2 and 2
Well,
can
so the
never
point
equal
that I'm
5.
getting at is that what it means to say that something is logically impossible is that it cannot obtain in any possible world, which
Uh-huh.
includes the actual world. If something
Agreed.
was logically impossible, you couldn't do it. You can't draw a square circle. You can't marry a woman as a man or another man as a man and still be a bachelor. You cannot ever do those things, but you can murder people. So clearly murder is not logically impossible because there's some
Right.
possible world in which it obtains, namely the actual world.
Did I
So
say it was
cannot be
logically impossible?
You did when you stated that it was logically contradictory, because what it means to say that something is contradictory logically is to say that it is logically impossible. A married bachelor is a logical contradiction in virtue of the fact that it's logically impossible.
Would you accept hypocritical?
No.
You wouldn't accept that things can be
No, hypocritical is
objectively
when you,
hypocritical.
it's like if I said, hey, you shouldn't smoke cigarettes while I'm puffing on a cigarette.
Right.
Well, that's
That-
just plain old hypocrisy.
Yeah.
well, that's plain old do
Right,
as I
so
say,
there's
not
a
as I do.
contradiction.
Hypocrisy
there.
is not a logical term.
It's a contradiction.
No.
Yeah. It's saying you should do something
What
and
do you
then
think a contradiction is?
Yeah, look, it's
What
only a
is
contradiction, Snake.
is-
It's only a contradiction if you accept oughts. And you,
Because
you're
I would
saying that
define a
it's not an ought.
contradiction under any given modality as some proposition and its negation obtaining simultaneously. That is what a contradiction to me is, and that can apply under any modality. So you could have logical contradictions, nomological contradictions, alethic contradictions, deontic contradictions. I mean, that's really neither here nor there, but that's what I understand a contradiction. So when you say that something is contradictory, I'm getting some proposition, the negation of that proposition, obtaining simultaneously, which obviously cannot happen. You can't
Yeah,
get a
the-
proposition
just-
and
the
its
proposition
negation at the
is-
same time in the same sense.
you are
Okay.
negating the proposition by doing a thing that you're saying
But
you
murder
shouldn't
is an
do.
action, not a proposition. There can be
that's-
propositions
Hang
about
on.
the action of murder, but murder as an action is not a proposition. It's not something handled by language. Contradictions don't exist in objects. They're features, again, of linguistic systems, because logic and linguistics are very closely connected.
Uh-huh. So I don't how is that a so you can have an ethical contradiction and
I
still
don't know
do
what
it.
that means. I don't know what an ethical contradiction is.
Saying you should
Okay,
do
well,
something
well,
and
once
then
again-
or
once-
not do
once
it and then
again,
doing it.
Snake, once again, you're assuming oughts. You're assuming the standard is accepted. And that's the very question that we're trying to get to with the Hume's is-ought distinction.
Yeah, all Hume's
So then we'll go back to
distinction
good and
says is
bad,
that
which
there's
are
a difference
objective
between
phenomena.
descriptive and prescriptive statements. That normative language and descriptive language are not the same. There's a distinction between those two separate
No,
types
they're
of
exactly
language.
the same because when I say something is good, I'm describing its objective
Yeah, but-
qualities.
No,
and
you're
its
not.
Good.
You're
objective
describing your
effects.
preferences.
Nope. It has nothing
Yeah,
to do with
you
preference.
are.
Nope.
Yes, it does.
Good.
Nope.
Good.
It's not my preference that brushing your teeth increases good health. It's not my preference.
Yeah, but your preference
that
is
you
toward
can
having good health,
objectively-
which informs the action of brushing
No,
your
it
teeth.
has
So
nothing to
again,
do
we're
with
going
that.
to preferences here.
It has nothing to do with that.
Yes, it does.
Nope. Not even close. So there are things that I prefer
I-
not to do, but I still do them.
I
Sure.
think
They're
what
good.
you're alluding
why
to,
do you-
and correct me if I'm wrong, Snake, but you're alluding to the fact that it's objectively better for the organism to have clean teeth. Am I right?
Yes. Especially if even like this is it's subjective if you're saying for the organism, but that is objectively true.
Well, that puts
is
it into the
better for the
context
organism.
where it is true.
But what do we mean when we say it's better for the organism?
Everything
I've
needs a
described
context.
that. You don't accept it. I
I
don't know
don't.
why.
I don't think you described that.
I defined good.
Mike, come and save us.
Yeah, but defining good is what the problem is. Is your definition of good is an order, and that's
Yeah,
what
your
I don't think
definition-
I
you
can.
are doing
Yes,
what
you do.
T-Jump
Why
tries
don't
to
you-
do.
hang
You're
on a
trying
minute.
to
Leo,
disconnect
Leo,
your
Leo,
moral
Leo.
system from normativity, which you can't do.
Well, I have done.
Yeah.
You have not done it.
I wasn't going to say quite
Just
the
like
same
T-Jump has
But-
not done it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the human mind is pretty malleable. It can do a fair amount of things.
Mhm.
Okay,
But
let's
it can even hold two contradictory thoughts at the same time.
it can, but that doesn't make them.
Yeah,
true, does it?
I can't. I
So
don't
look,
think
anyway,
that-
before we
So-
go down that road, because that's a different road, and I want to try and just push it on a little bit, bearing in mind, Mike. Okay, I would like to go to Mike. Snake, as far as I can tell, Snake, you were literally saying to me anyway that you've defined good, and then you've put good in the second premise, and then you've managed to get to a conclusion, which is an ought conclusion. And you think that just because that's the first premise is an is premise, that makes it okay. That means you are getting from an ought to an is to an ought rather. And what I'm saying is that, yeah, that is true. What you're saying is true on that basis. But the second premise is an ought premise. So it's not really, it's kind of, is it circular, I guess?
Well,
I'm not
sort
sure
of.
whether circular is the right word. Might be a tautology I'm thinking of. I don't know the exact term or fallacy, which it is, but I'm just saying that there's already an ought statement in the premises. So
Yeah,
you're
but
not
we don't
concluding-
have to.
and you're not concluding an ought from an is, right? You're concluding an ought from an is and an ought.
But we can swap out
okay
the
too.
ought for equivalent words that are all is statements.
I don't think that you're going to find any words, right? Which
Yeah,
are
what
just
are those
purely
words?
is words in the second premise, which you need in order to get to the ought. I don't think you're going to be able to do that. But I'd like to get to Mike. I'm sorry to cut you off here. I just wanted to explain what I think the objection is there, right?
Okay.
And if you can come
Okay,
up
I
with
don't
any
know.
words, please put them in chat and I'll we'll come back to and address them. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I don't know if I
Go
can
ahead,
say
Mike,
to you
sorry.
guys. I understand kind of where Snake is coming from, and that's why I was talking about rocks. And okay, the one thing that frames this entire discussion for the last hour and 25 minutes is that we keep conflating and confusing humans with objective reality that we imagine without humans, right? When Leo started, okay, so we were talking about a rock, two rocks interacting. That's one thing. And then Leo mentioned a rock falling on a human, which would be over here, right? But now you brought humans back into it, right? And then we can go a little bit further and we can talk about a human dropping a rock on a human. So now we got two humans interacting. So you got to frame your discussion when you're talking about morals. When you're talking about morals being objective, if you could stand outside of humans, then you could come up with a way to derive an ought from an is. Okay. If you stand outside of humans, look at them as organisms. You define what is good for an organism as that which makes the organism thrive. You go through all of that stuff. And then you can start and you can say, okay, so I ought to eat a helping of vegetables every day, right? And you could look at that outside. Do you see what I mean? What did Nietzsche say? Human, all too human. I don't know if he was referring to this, but we have a hell of a time when we're talking about morals and ethics. Being objective, we have a hell of a time getting to a world where there are no organisms. Now, Leo went from human to aliens, right? Still an organism in our minds. We still think it's an organism. It's got some kind of a valence or something that it does. So when you look at morals, what you're looking at is action. You're like, you said something earlier, Simus. You said how to live my life. That morals, apply to how to live my life. Well, when you're thinking about how to live your life, you are planning to act. So morals are always about actions that we're taking, right? Does that make sense? Or not?
Does to me.
Okay. And also, Bugrit's codifying. I was kind of with him on that too. So, and anyway, so what I ask is that when we talk about this stuff, we have to frame it in terms of, okay, we're a bunch of humans talking about normative things with each other about what we think the other person should do. And you can go to all these levels, okay? And that's the other thing is there's levels, okay? There's the individual, there's the group, there's the locale, there's the country, there's humans, mammals, animals, and then the world. So we're trying to talk about, like, when we say something is real objectively, we're presumably talking about what we imagine the world is without humans, right? Anybody disagree with that?
I disagree with
Huh?
that. When I say that something is true objectively, I just mean it's true independent of stances held by any potential agents.
That's kind of what I said, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
okay, it's
I
true
don't think
that
there's
there.
anything to do with the world necessarily.
It's true. It's true that there's a electron on Betelgeuse at such and such a coordinate. We'd say it's true that there is such a thing, right? That would be objective. Would
Is
it
that an
not?
yeah, that's an objectively true statement. That's correct.
Okay, good. Glad we agree on that. So, it all starts with that. But then when you get down and you start talking about what we're doing between humans, that's where you guys start talking over each other because you're coming from slightly different. You may be coming from different groups. Like when you start talking about the baby thing, the baby thing that all philosophers end up talking about, you're kind of talking about what all humans would agree with. And I think all mammals would agree with it if mammals were in a place where they could agree with us on things. They would say, oh, my baby is more important than anything else, right? So, I mean, all I ask is that you frame it and try to take human out of the equation and look at humans as if you were a god, a god's eye view, looking at humans from some other weird perspective, right? And then talk about what morality is. And I think that you'd be able to see where some of the statements that Snake is making are kind of correct too, along with the statements that Leo's making. And I don't know if I explained this well.
Out of the picture, then in what sense are we talking about morality? If we're not
Right,
even talking about humans and what they do.
Exactly.
Well, then I'm just then we're not on topic. We're talking.
Then
about
they're not
else.
real. They're not real outside of humans, right? They're only real when it comes to humans.
You do know that I am an anti-realist, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
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 So
they wouldn't be
morality
real.
are rooted moral statements. We can call them propositions. I'm not sure if they're propositions, but we can call them propositions. The truth of those propositions is not stance independent. It's not dependent on any features of the world.
What I'm
It's
talking
dependent on the
about,
preferences of the agents talking about it.
what I'm talking about is trying to take your mind, your thinking, your framing of things outside of humans and try to look at it objectively without being a human.
I don't know. I don't know how to do that. I don't.
Well, we try to do that all the time.
I don't have the
that,
preferences.
When we say that there is a
non-human.
Okay, when we say that there's an electron at such and such a coordinate on Betelgeuse, we are we are imagining a world without humans. We're taking ourselves out of the human perspective.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with preferences.
Not until you get back down and like, okay, so you have to, so you fly your spaceship from Betelgeuse down to the planet Earth and you start looking at what these humans are doing. And then we can talk about preferences because those are human things, all too human.
Yeah, exactly.
The thing is you're creating category errors by dancing between the two different frames. And that's all I got.
What you mean by frames, and I don't know what categories I'm making an error between.
I know,
All I'm pointing out is that where any particular electron is not a normative statement. Moral statements are normative statements. They're definitionally normative statements.
But there's something else going on besides just preference and saying, I don't like genocide. There is a contradiction in
Take me
the
down,
proposition
Simons.
of genocide. What'd you say?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Go ahead. Snake, carry
I
on.
said take me down. I'm hoping to clarify a little bit by getting everybody to pick their frames when they're talking about things, so we don't make category errors. And
Yeah.
it all frustrates me.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's I think this particular conversation is an age-old conversation. I just want to say a couple of things right now. Firstly, are you there, Piper? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. So, please, could you just help me along with some of the statements I'm about to make, which are probably overgeneralizations or probably incorrect. Are all moral theories in philosophy, as Leo is claiming right now, I believe, and again, Leo, shout if I'm wrong about this, to do with normative statements?
More or less. I mean, so there are some moral naturalists who want to say that normativity reduces to the descriptive, but by and large, I mean, even in those cases, what they're saying is, okay, you take, whatever normative facts there supposedly are, and then you can reduce them to descriptive facts. So yeah, pretty much always the target is evaluative normative statements.
Yeah, but there is a couple of outliers. Is that right? Then that people who think that you can, in fact, do that and take a normative statement and give a descriptive explanation, I guess.
Yeah, so there are, like I said, there are some moral naturalists who think that they're actually not even. Sorry?
Could you give me an example of one? Who might that be?
I don't know a name, but
I do. Ben Watkins, Benjamin Blake Speed Watkins. I don't know anybody knows him. He works with real theology. He's I think he's a moral naturalist. Maybe I'm wrong. I know he's a realist, but I'm pretty sure
you
he's
can
a
be
naturalist.
be a naturalist and not
have
the view that it reduces to descriptive facts. Also,
yeah. When I said naturalist, it's moral naturalist.
Yeah. Well, no, you can be a non-reductive moral naturalist also, but I think he was more asking, like, I mean, does Ben do work in philosophy? Like, is he a philosopher?
I would say he's a philosopher. Yeah, not maybe professionally, but
okay. I think he was asking about professional philosophers, but
yeah. I'll ask
Humer's
Google.
not a moral naturalist, is he?
No, he's not. Non-naturalist.
Okay.
I don't know a name off the top of my head,
Neither
but I can
do
explain to you the position. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go talk amongst yourself. I'm just going to look it up. I'll AI it and see what happens.
I think
moral naturalist.
You might find the name of some of the people that have that position, like some names that are attached to papers. If you go on the SEP about moral naturalism. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
I happen to have that in PDF form somewhere. Yeah, moral facts are part of the natural world. And the natural world contains organisms.
So therefore, the existence of organisms that can come up with a moral code is evidence of objective moralism?
Yeah, it would be, kind of, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it is.
Like, yeah, we humans have this thing that we're always talking about called morality, so obviously it exists in some fashion. What fashion is what we're fighting over.
That's kind of in the same realm as because human beings are endeavoring to understand the universe and we're a product of the universe, one could safely say the universe is trying to understand itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where we get in a lot of trouble, I think. Can't get ourselves out of it.
I'm really struggling to put the right words in to come out with the result in Wiki. So
what do you, Simon?
I did
what
it
is
for
that you're
ChatGPT.
interested in trying to figure out?
well, I'm trying to figure
Oh,
out
moral
if-
naturalism.
Yeah, but it's more than that. As Fluffy said. So
what do you
I'm trying
want?
to work out whether there's any professional philosophers which have put forward the view that oughts can be reduced to is statements. Without this, in other words, that you can
Well,
put
so
two
to be
premises
clear,
together which are descriptive and come out with an ought conclusion.
yeah. So to be clear, what I was talking about were moral naturalists who want to do an ontological reduction, meaning they want to say that even if there's a logical distinction between normative and descriptive statements, ultimately normative properties reduce to physical properties, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to find very many philosophers. I mean, I think actually, what's his name?
Philippa
I think-
Foot is
was
one
it-
of them.
Was it Searle that tried to write
Yes,
a paper
John-
critiquing Izzat? But
John Searle.
usually Izzat is going to be affirmed by the vast majority of philosophers as a gap, right?
Yeah.
It's the
So
big
you have-
problem that T-Jump has with his whole moral idea is that he's trying to make morality rooted in is statements, which just doesn't really. Then that's not a morality because it's not prescriptive. It's not telling us about our actions and behaviors. It's just describing stuff about the world. Morality doesn't just describe stuff about the world. It prescribes actions and behaviors and perhaps even beliefs that we should have. So
Right.
you can't disconnect morality from that concept of normativity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, look, I'm not disagreeing with you here on the for the sake of it here, right? What I'm trying to do is just be devil's advocate in some sense, and to say I've spoken to T-Jump at length about this, and he basically is just redefining the word moral to not have an ought part in it, right? And he says you can derive oughts from it, but that's not what he means when he says a moral, right? So it's kind of weird. Kind of weird.
His whole thing, I mean, I think you just said it, but his whole thing is like changing the subject. Like he's taking the word morality and then, assigning whatever definition he wants to it, right? Regardless of the actual debate in philosophy or the actual, ethical debates that people have with each other. You know?
Yeah. And the strange thing is, he says you could take that conclusion and then you can put an ought statement on as another premise and derive an ought conclusion, right?
Have you ever heard his crazy argument for it?
Which is just sidestepping the argument as far as we can see, because we're talking about that distinction.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what, like Leo was saying right at the beginning of all of this.
The best you can do is use is statements as stances that play a part in your evaluation that then prescribe ought statements, but that doesn't make ought statements and is statements somehow like the same thing. So you might say that, well, a particular is statement might be that the sun emits electromagnetic radiation. Somebody might take that is statement and then use that in an evaluation when they go outside into the sun to come to the conclusion that they ought to put sunscreen on. But that ought statement is not an is statement.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really derived from.
Yeah, it is.
More like informed by, but not derived from.
Sure. Okay, I just want to adjust what Mike's put up on the screen here because was the answer that I was looking for. So here's a list of philosophers who are allegedly, I guess according to AI, have some form of moral theory which claims that you can derive an ought from an is, and obviously Hume being the obvious exception on that list because it's his framing that we're talking about. So yeah, just to say, Patricia Churchland, obviously a very good practical biologist.
Yep. Owen Flanagan's not on this
good
list, and I don't know why.
But anyway, people can look those people up and see the other side of the issue from another perspective. Let's get back to us talking about it, though.
But would you guys agree if objective good can be defined or whatever, would that collapse the distinction?
I think
No.
you can, as long as you provide a framework, as Mike was describing.
No, I think the word good is an alt word. So that's never going to describe, even if you get a definition of it. It's not.
It
gonna,
requires a context. It requires a viewpoint. Good for who? From whose perspective is it good?
Well, I would say that as soon as
Exactly, it's
if you
normative.
can say what's good for something, you already have an objective standard for what good is, because you're just saying whatever
but then
What
creates
makes the standard
just-
whatever
objective?
sustains it and creates
You're
functionality
just-
in it,
Yeah, but
and that can be
but-
measured on any
Sure.
scale.
All of that might be true, but it's still you're going to imply that the good is what you ought to do. I mean,
It can be purely descriptive. It doesn't
Well,
have
yeah,
to
I know
be-
that statement could be then described.
It's not a
but
motivating statement.
but-
It doesn't say
but-
you have to do it. It says
right.
it's
But
good
as
to
your
do it.
hang on, as your description of good goes, it's not going to. The description itself is not going to be what says you ought to do it. It's going to be implication. It's going to be by inference that the good is what you ought to. Right. So it doesn't matter whether you give a descriptive and is statement to describe the standard. The point is the standard itself is what you're then going to say is what you ought to do, and that's the problem again.
But
So it
if
doesn't
that's
matter whether you
objectively,
can-
if it's objectively measurable, then it's an objective fact now. It's not just a preference,
Sure, but that might be just like
and so it's an is.
Well, but
no, it's
the
not.
thing
doesn't
is,
make
the
it an
ought
is just
isn't
because it's
what's
objective.
the ought itself is not what's like objective in the sense of being objectively true. It's the truth of the moral proposition. You still ought to do, like, I could grant that morality is objective. You still ought to do what is good. You still ought to do those things. And that's still a different statement than describing something. Because ought implies some sort of prescription, a duty or an obligation.
But that's a description
Action,
too.
behavior.
A duty or an obligation is a description.
A description of what?
So,
Duty's another alt word.
well, you can keep asking what does that mean, and they can all be described as is statements.
I don't know what you mean by that.
So like ought kind of has a lot of different usages. So there's like the subjective, like I want you to do this. There's probability, like the rock ought to go this way when it falls down the hill.
Well, I don't think probability deals with oughts in that sense.
Well, it's people use the word to say that. Is what I'm saying.
I don't think so. No, nowhere in any
Well, you don't think
textbook on anything in the
people
world
go,
is it going to
well-
say that like a ball in a gravitational field of some given force ought to roll down a slope of this angle at this speed. No, it just will.
No,
And
a
again,
physicist wouldn't say
that's the difference.
But you can
You're
say-
describing what happens.
But
You're not
people will, like,
prescribing what happens.
Will hook up the electricity and then say, well, the lights should come on now if you flick the switch. Something like that.
Yeah,
Or the
but
car
that-
the
but
car
that's
should
not-
start.
Yeah, but that's not should as in terms of ought.
I know it's
That
not a
should
moral.
as in terms of expectation.
I was just throwing out all of the usages. So the things relevant to morality or duty or correctness.
Well, I don't know what you mean by correctness here.
Just
If we
just
just
the
mean it in
normal
sort of
average
the
usage.
Alethic sense that like something is true or false, I just don't get how that applies here, because that applies to propositions, not actions. If we mean correctness in some normative sense, then, well, you're still dealing in normativity.
So I'm going all the way down to the fact of existence itself is a form of correctness.
I don't. If you're saying the universe exists is a correct proposition, then I
No.
get what you're saying.
Uh-uh.
Because if you mean correctness in some sense of like truth or falsity, I think that only applies to propositions, not to actions or behaviors.
It's referring to if something exists, something is happening correctly that it exists. If it doesn't happen correctly, it doesn't
Huh?
exist. So if you don't plug in,
So correctness is is an ontological term, is what you're saying.
Sure. If you
So-
don't plug in the lamp,
Santa Claus is
it can't-
incorrect. Would that? Do you
Sorry,
understand
sorry,
what I mean there?
people born
Uh,
with congenital conditions didn't enter this world correctly in the sense that you're meaning it, Snake.
There's a lot to unpack there, but there's things in their body that isn't working correctly.
And when you say correctly, what in that particular
Functionally.
context of say functional.
Right.
And by functional, we're going to mean the standardized chemistry of biology.
Sure.
And that is not something normative. So it says
That's where
nothing
I
about
disagree.
actions or behaviors. Well, I mean, it's not normative. Biology is not a normative subject.
Not entirely. I think
I
it
mean, not
crosses
at all.
over sometimes.
Not at all.
Okay,
So I
just like
hinted at
chemistry or
this,
physics are
like
not
when
normative.
I made the comment earlier in the chat. I said morality is less about empathy and more about why empathy works. Referring to how a society that's built on empathy is going to function more correctly, which means it's going to function and not self-destruct.
Function more correctly by what standard?
It has more. Well, okay. What does correct mean to you? Like if something happens
True.
correctly. Yeah, so if something is true, that means it's happening
Not necessarily.
or has happened
Not necessarily.
or
It's true that Santa Claus wears a red suit. Santa Claus isn't real.
I
this is
would
a different
argue
form
that.
of true.
Yeah, again, I would argue that that's.
What?
I would
Santa Claus not
argue-
real?
I would argue that, yeah, like Santa Claus. If you're asking for a truthful statement, that is not a truthful statement. Same as Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead. Like that's not. I would not consider that a true statement.
So Harry Potter does not have a scar on his forehead?
There,
My-
no
Not in
truthful
reality.
kids-
statement cannot be.
I
derived.
didn't ask you if in reality Harry Potter has a scar on his forehead. I asked you, does Harry Potter have a scar on his forehead?
Statement can be derived in regards to a scar existing or not existing on the forehead of a fictional character.
Well, I think so. I think that concepts can have truth or falsity because I think concepts can be propositional.
Absolutely, I think that concepts can have truth or falsity.
Yeah, Harry Potter's a concept. There are propositions relating to
He's
that
a
concept.
Fictional
And-
concept, yes.
Yeah, fictional concept, same thing. And there are propositions.
Not the same thing.
Well, I think that concepts are fictional in the sense that concepts are not
Concepts
things
are not
in
fictional.
the world. Well, but you didn't let me define what I meant by fictional. I think they're fictional in the sense that they're not things in the world. Concepts are not. I can't reach out and grab a concept. Concept doesn't have mass. It's not a thing out there in the world.
But what are they about?
Concepts are features of neurobiology. Now, the neurobiology is a thing in the world.
It's like saying that a word isn't real.
In that strict ontic sense, yes, I would agree. Words are not real. Words are conceptual schemas developed by humans. If there were no humans, there'd be no words.
Okay, but then Harry Potter is real. Like,
No. Harry Potter is not real. Harry Potter is abstract. He's a concept. But there can be abstracta can have propositions or be propositional, which means they can be true or false. So truth or falsity doesn't have to do with whether something exists really in the world. It has to do with whether or not it's propositional.
Okay.
But there was already an episode on
equivocating
truth
here.
like a month and a half ago, I think, that Simus did, because I remember watching it.
That's right. Yeah.
Maybe you should do a part 2.
I think we're going to need more than just a couple of parts. But anyway, there we are. Okay. I'm not sure exactly where we're up to, but I was following the conversation for quite a while. Snake, is there something you'd like to say particularly about anything that you've discussed so far?
I think you can measure good and better in the sense of what's good and bad for an organism. What whether the design of a particular boat floats better or worse. And
Yeah.
so that's what I would say is a test.
That's what
of-
you're calling good. Okay.
Like that shows that there's some property here that is an objective fact,
Mhm.
which we call good.
Yeah.
And that's what I
yeah,
use as the basis
sure.
for morality.
Okay, that makes it a lot clearer actually for me. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing, right? I mean, I just appeal to Leo here and just say, think of, the least action principle, right? There does seem to be something in nature which, uses a principle, an abstract principle, or follows an abstract principle, right? And that seems to be a way to measure something which is objectively true in nature, right? And when I say
I hear-
true, I don't mean the language version of true. I mean the what that word, the proposition, relates to in reality, right? I don't want to use the same phrase I used earlier because I think you're probably right about what you said earlier. But does that make sense, Leah?
I hear a
Just that-
philosopher in the background
just that part
making
on
sense.
its own. Just that part on its own, Leah. I'm not trying to relate it to morality now at all. You're muted.
The baby in the background is making a lot of sense right now.
I think Snake is just taking a non-normative usage of good. What he means
Okay,
by good is
just
just some
ignore
sort
what I
of
said then.
descriptive
I think so.
feature. Yeah, no, that's what I'm
Well-
saying. I'm kind of like expounding on it and explaining what I'm seeing the problem as.
Yeah.
And then taking a descriptive usage of good and dragging that into morality, which is prescriptive, which is normative, and I just don't think that works. That is
Well-
what I would call a category error.
Right.
I can explain why.
Yeah. No.
I understand what you're saying.
I don't want to go round it again. You've made that point several times, Leo. I've tried to reinforce that by saying what the objection is to the way he's using the word good. Hopefully, Snake, you've heard what I've said, so let's not go round that again.
Yeah. Well,
And
I would just say that I think there's ways I can demonstrate that is actually how people use the term when they're talking about morality. It's just kind of hidden. People.
well,
kind of like-
yeah, every time you've described it to me, though, I've just gone back to saying, yeah, but there's a presupposition in what you're saying, which is that we ought to do what is good.
And it also
Um,
needs the context.
I don't think the odd is necessary.
However you describe it, doesn't matter how you're describing what good is. I'm not interested in the definition of the word good. I'm just saying the
Mhm.
presupposition in the use of the word good in relation to morality is that we ought do. And that's what
Yeah.
makes it a standard, right? When people say, well, that's, well-being is what is good.
Well, it's
that's
tautological.
just
Ought do good is the same statement. It's a tautology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
right. So the
I
word good
agree.
itself, regardless of the definition, is an ought word, right? And so you can't, and that's the point. That's the problem that I think Leo
Well,
is
I'd
accurately
say-
pointing out, and I think
say
many
ought-
philosophers point out, right?
I'd say it's opposite. Ought is a good word, not that good is an ought word. If that makes any
Doesn't
difference.
matter.
to
Well,
you.
but if it's a tautology, both of those are true. Just like a
Yeah, it
bachelor is
does-
an
Uh-huh.
unmarried man, well, an unmarried man is a bachelor.
Mhm.
That's what it means. That's what it means to be tautological.
It's not going to make
X
any
is
difference.
Y is X.
Not going to make any difference. And as I say, the point is the description of good doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether you think good is what God says or good is what some standard like well-being, right? Both of those two things are irrelevant to the fact that you still can't derive an ought
Yeah.
from an is.
It doesn't matter what you think is good or is bad. It's that you think that what you think is good is what you ought to do, and what you think is bad is what you ought not to do.
That's the problem, yeah.
Unless
In
you
a
have an
nutshell.
objective usage, then your preference doesn't matter.
No, it's not about preference. Because
Well,
any
I
preference,
think morality is about preference.
Yeah,
Then why
but
use
it
the
doesn't
word
matter.
preference at
It
all,
doesn't,
or
it
morality
doesn't
at all?
matter. It doesn't matter. It's not about preference in that sense, because whether you think good is just preferential or objective, right? Theists think it's objective, right? But they still can't guarantee. They still say what you ought do what is good. right?
Yeah, but I
And
think
this-
that is a preferential statement to say you ought to do
Doesn't
what
matter.
is good.
Doesn't
It's
matter.
effectively
Doesn't
to say that
fucking matter whether
you
you think it's
prefer what you
preferential.
prefer.
And this
Doesn't
is
matter.
where
Doesn't matter.
perspective or context really makes all the difference to the argument.
Doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter in this case what the definition of good is. The presupposition behind using the word good is that it's something that you ought to do, and I can't see any way around that.
There is
Because
no way
if
around
it's
that.
if it's completely context independent, right? Like there is
Well,
no
it's
context that you can give
context
it.
It's
There's no context that
dependent.
you can give the word good, which doesn't have the presupposition behind it that that's what you ought to.
Well,
I don't know how to do that.
The simplest example I can give you,
Yeah.
Simos, is what is good for the lion is not necessarily what's good for the gazelle,
Sure.
and vice versa.
Right. Yeah, I
So
mean, that's-
context or perspective really
I think
does make the
Pythagoras-
difference.
Pythagoras used to say that, I think. Yeah. Right.
that
What's good for the
Pythagoras?
donkey is not necessarily what's good for man.
There you go.
Piper, go ahead, because I really like you to chime in here and just correct me on what I said that's wrong. If I
I mean, I don't think you said anything wrong. I wasn't going to say anything of substance. I was just going to tell Snake that he might want to mute when he's not talking because his baby is making a lot of noise.
Is that because that's not good for you, or
The philosopher in his background is opining.
The baby's making more sense than philosophers do.
Not when I put a cracker in there.
yeah? Anyway, look, I think I don't think there's much point in going around all of that again. I think that's as explained it as simply as I can explain it. Anyway, if yeah, I don't know how to explain it in any other way.
We've
So,
exhausted it. That's how you
if
explain
you
it.
think
We've
you can give
exhausted that
me
topic.
if you can give me a moral ought in which you don't use the word good, right, to describe or to give you what you should do, then that would be lovely.
Or synonyms of good.
Or synonyms of good, or words like bad, wrong,
Better,
even
best,
Beneficial.
because those are also normative because they're just
Yeah.
the superlative forms of good.
and
They're
certainly
also
there may be
perspective.
there may be a gap there which you could exploit, perhaps using the word incorrect or something. Oh, he's gone. Oh, he's back. You still in stage? Okay. Anyway,
Are you talking to me?
yeah, I was. Yeah,
Oh,
Go on me.
I keep kind of lagging a little bit.
no worries, no worries. Anyway, that would be my kind of thing. I'd love to hear it, and same with you, Mike. Like I don't know if you could get over this distinction between is or then. I'd really love to hear it, but
Can I just
right-
specify?
right now, I just think every time somebody is specifying using a normative word, as Leo says, I guess. And let's
Can I
use
just-
the technical term.
Specify that the distinction, at least today, is largely going to be considered the ISOT distinction. That is going to be considered. I prefer to call it a distinction rather than a problem because it's not a problem. It's just a distinction about two different types of language. It's more a linguistic distinction between the language that we use to just merely describe or state facts about what something is versus making prescriptions that assign action or behavior, and that those two kinds of ways of talking are they're not the same way of talking, and you will never make them the same way of talking. Descriptive
maybe somebody-
and
maybe somebody.
prescriptive language are just different ways. They're different ways of talking
Sure.
about the world.
Sure, I that's a convicted view you
I-
have. I hear that, and maybe it is true. I don't know the future of philosophy, and maybe there's going to be somebody far brighter than we are that actually manages to do it. I don't know.
I tried.
Maybe
Ask Speed. He knows. Back in
Yeah.
2021 and stuff, he knows. I used to think that that you could overcome the distinction. I don't anymore because, well,
Yeah.
I don't think that you can.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. That doesn't mean it will never. That doesn't mean it will never happen. Okay.
We
so-
all- We ought
Yeah,
to
I
start
agree,
to wrap
but
this up.
nonetheless, yeah, I'd like to as well. Piper.
Yeah, morality
anything-
does not come from God.
Piper, before we go, let's just hear a bit of, what do they call it? Philosophy on
Comfort philosophy.
Yeah, I think that's one of the words they use. On whether do you think that there is no way around this problem? Is there no outsider view in philosophy which tries to grapple? I mean, we've been given several names, and I don't recognize any of those names, and so
I mean, I don't think. I mean, to me, it just seems like a matter of logic. So, normative statements have, let's say, propositional content that descriptive statements don't have, and so you can't derive the one from the other.
Could you say that again for me? Could you just say that sentence again for me? Normative statements.
So normative statements have, let's say, propositional content that descriptive statements don't have. So the conditions under which a normative statement is true are going to be very different than the conditions under which a descriptive statement is true by definition, right? So that means that you can't derive logically one from the other. I mean, I think it's just a point of logic. I don't think.
Okay, so can you give me an example of one of each and the contrast, right?
Yeah. So if I say I killed your grandmother, right? Okay, all that's required for that to be true is that I actually, went and ended your grandmother's life, right? To say that it's bad for me to kill your grandmother, that requires something extra to be true. That requires that it has this, there's this normative feature of things or stances or whatever that makes it bad, that has an evaluative quality. The mere fact that I killed your grandmother, the proposition that merely asserts that I killed your grandmother has no evaluative content, whereas the proposition that it's bad for me to do that does have evaluative content.
Right, and by evaluative, you mean it needs some extra explanation of a presupposition.
Yeah, I mean, there's the element which says it's good or bad or right or wrong, right? That's the evaluative content, the normativity or whatever.
Stances. I like to say.
Because
evaluation usually occurs against a person's stances, so their beliefs, desires, aims, goals, or motivations, things like that.
Sure.
And
I'm just trying
that's why I say preferences are important, and that's also why I think that morality cannot be stance independent, because normative claims are intrinsically dependent on evaluation against stances. So
I'm just trying to get to the point that there's a presupposition in these terms, right, which needs further explanation, right? Whereas in the descriptive sentence, everything is contained within the sentence. And sure, the words have definitions and stuff, but there's no presupposition which needs an extra descriptive term, which in itself, it might be controversial, shall we say, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can think about it as just, what makes a descriptive statement descriptive, merely descriptive, let's say, is that it doesn't have any prescriptive element, whereas a prescriptive statement has a prescriptive element because it's prescriptive.
Really quick, Piper, would you say this holds true independently of whether the truth of the moral statement is stance dependent or stance independent?
Yeah, I mean, I think most moral realists are going to, sign up to that. So are anti-realists usually. I mean, I think it holds regardless of whether moral realism is true or not true.
Okay. It'd be interesting to look at Mike's list, I feel. And Mike, maybe
some familiar names on that list. Patricia Churchland?
Yeah, I recognize her, and I recognize her work in biology. Of course, she has she has a philosopher husband as well, doesn't she?
Patricia and Paul, the Churchlands, as they're called.
Yeah.
The Churchlands, yeah. And then John Searle and Owen Flanagan, they're well-known names. The rest of them, I'm not familiar with, like Philippa Foot, but
I think.
But they're all people that.
Searle was a very influential 20th century philosopher. Go ahead.
He's kind of an ass. Yeah. But I like him.
There we go. Okay, so I think what we'll do then is we'll wrap it up there. I don't know. Did we answer the question, Fabio? Can you just before
I mean,
we go around the sum ups? You can have a sum up after at the end, obviously.
to be super totally fair, no, I wasn't expecting an answer actually to be
Correct.
found. Yeah, but the conversation was interesting. I think that's all it matters, right?
Yeah, for sure. And
What-
one of the
What
things
was the
I want,
question?
one of the things the question I can't even remember myself now.
There you
The
go.
object,
Object of morality.
the object of morality. I thought we were going to go down to some kind of talk about Platonism, but we didn't. So I'm happy for that as well. And
Satanism?
No, yeah,
Platonism.
Satanism, yeah, which is
Oh.
similar.
Platonism, yeah, Platonism is just Satanism.
It's what the church
Okay.
is based on, so it's as good as Satanism.
Yeah, I agree.
But there we go. Maybe that's just, I don't know. Maybe that's.
I'm a nominalist. I got to give the Platonists some shit.
Yeah,
But for
fair enough.
those listening that have a little bit of OCD in that regard, yeah, it's a Plato reference.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Fabio came up with it, so thank you to Fabio for that. Okay, look,
Yeah.
we're going to go around the room and just everybody can wrap up what they want to say. I'm going to start and go in a random order, but Minnow, please, if you can, please just give us your thoughts on the conversation in general and anything specific you wish to add.
I was gonna say happy Juneteenth.
yeah.
And as far as gosh, really you want me to like wrap up the conversation?
No, for your perspective. Just give me anything you want to say.
I still think
from your
morality is
perspective.
completely subjective.
Okay. I mean, you can't get much more objective than that statement, can you?
Haven't changed my mind whatsoever.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair
I was
enough.
open to changing it though. I will say
Good.
I was open to changing it.
Okay, spoken like a true philosopher. Okay, over to you, Snake, since you were last in.
Yeah, so I guess if morality is subjective, then I think we should stop using the word entirely and just say this is my preference, because it doesn't mean anything if it's the exact same concept as preference. But I think there is something else here. There are problems with the proposition, certain moral propositions, like genocide is clearly hypocritical, murder, things like that. I would say there's logical problems. Leo would quibble over probably my word use there, but we can have that discussion later. I guess I think a lot of the reason that we're talking past each other is like the prescriptive versus descriptive part of it. Like I kind of think if we're talking about objective morality, the prescriptive kind of collapses into the descriptive. So the idea that if I'm using a descriptive framework, that therefore it's not prescriptive and therefore there's some kind of we still have a gap between the descriptive and the prescriptive. I think that's probably part of a miscommunication here. So I think the entire purpose of objective morality is that the prescriptive part is part of the descriptive. Or prescriptive, Speed was saying something that kind of reminded me of another part of my philosophy on this, is that the prescriptive is kind of the relationship between intelligent creatures. So like I was saying earlier, a rock hitting a person is bad, but it's not immoral. So I think morality is something that comes from intelligent beings, but good and bad are just objective things, and that is the basis of morality. And I guess that's kind of my stance.
Okay, that's fair enough. I think you said that earlier, so I wouldn't expect you to say any different. If I can make a quick suggestion, which is maybe Mike, you and Snake could have a conversation on your channel or something at some point. I think that would be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think we agree. It's just the words are a little floppy.
Words.
So
Yeah, I agree with
words.
the words being floppy there. But
Yeah,
I love
y'all
you,
just need
Snake.
to pester me because I've been absent from YouTube because of this baby. So
I've noticed. I love you,
Ah,
Snake. I'm
BB.
so happy. I'm so happy you've got a
Yeah.
new Bella, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I've missed you a lot. So
Yeah.
just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Okay, on to you, Leo. Thoughts on the topic and sum up, if you would mind, please.
Yeah, I think I hold the moral anti-realism. I think that the truth of moral propositions, if moral statements even are propositional, again, I'm still thinking about that. Is just they hold dependent on stances. I find it difficult to understand what it would mean for morality to be stance independent. I struggle with that concept a little bit. Maybe I'm just not educated enough on the subject. But I think that as a lot of particularly recent research has shown that a lot of people, contrary to popular belief, don't have moral realist intuitions when it comes to these things. So, and as far as preferences go, the language of ought and should and best and better is preferential language. So it's not that we should abandon that language in virtue of some other preferential language. It's that is preferential language. When I say vanilla ice cream is really good, I'm saying that I have a preference for vanilla ice cream. When I say murder is wrong, I'm saying that I don't have a preference for murder. I prefer not murder, in fact. So the level at which preferences relate to morality is debated. There's some people that think that morality really just is preferences. I tend to take that view, and I think that there are a lot of intersubjective preferences that humans have, like murder and some other things. And that is largely how the world operates in my view. I
Okay.
guess I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, no, perfect sum up. Thank you so much. Over to you, Hedris.
This evening's conversation would be better off arguing about whether a hot dog is a sandwich.
Well, what do we mean
It
by
is
sandwich?
It would have been far more productive.
It
It's
is
a sum up,
not
Leo.
a
It's a
sandwich.
sum up. Not a follow
I
up.
know.
It's a sum up.
I'm being. Yeah.
Okay, I know. But let's not.
Define hot dog.
Yeah, well, define
Define
what a dog is.
sandwich.
But that's what. But
Yeah.
exactly. But that's where these
In
discussions
fact,
go.
let's do a Jordan Peters on it. I don't know what dog, hot,
Well,
or
look,
sandwich
Means
look to
dog.
be no. Well,
Yeah.
I think he's got the right idea there, because I think to be a sandwich is to be willing to die to be a sandwich.
Oh yeah.
Okay, it's your sum up next, Piper. Go for it.
Well, I have very strong views on both this and the sandwich thing. Hot dogs are not sandwiches. You can fight me on that. But yeah, I mean, I never really said what my view of the morality stuff is. I mean, I'm a relativist or subjectivist of a certain kind. I think moral facts are facts, certain facts about what types of action are conducive to the goals of human beings or sentient beings. So, and I'm pretty strongly attached to that position. None of the realist arguments have swayed me at all. Any of the ones that I've encountered, I don't expect that they will in the future. So I'm pretty confident in that position. So yeah, I mean, that's my view that I never really sort of staked out in this discussion. Overall, it was an interesting conversation. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for being here, Piper. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
It's
My
really
pleasure.
good to see you again as well, and to hear you.
Likewise.
Over to you, Mike.
Okay. So I think moral realists, okay, aside from Platonists and Christians, right? The God people, moral realists really do agree with the moral irrealists, except that they're kind of struggling over the idea of what we call real. And I think that's the main contention, basically. And it goes on to structural realism and a few things like that. And the problem with calling it a preference, like not murdering a preference, is that it conflates it with having like a preference for vanilla ice cream. and people react emotionally to that. So that's kind of like a bad way of framing it, and that gets us into fights too. When we start saying, "Oh, it's just a preference," it's like, well, you're kind of reducing it to something that doesn't mean anything. So anyway, that's about all I got to say. Oh, yeah, one other thing is I'm shooting for basically trying to develop a methodology in philosophy based on naturalism. And it has to do with framing and God's eye view and stuff like that. And I'm always struggling with that and trying to, one of the things that occur to me when I do it is it reduces things almost to a naive form, and it makes everything too simple. But I think that may be a feature. I don't know. Anyway, I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yeah. Goodbye.
And like I would just say to everybody, Mike's link is in the chat below. Piper, if you want to put, if you have a link you want me to put in description, please put it into private chat, and I've already done that. Piper's is in description. Leo, likewise, I can put yours link in there. Snake as well. Dave's also got one in. And speaking of Dave, we're going to go over to you next. Dave, how did you find the conversation, and do you have anything you wish to reflect?
I do find it interesting bringing up the preferences as to what some would see as morals, others would see as preferences, and leading to things like laws and stuff. I think that leans more towards objectivity, where more people agree that something is heinous enough to be a law, but those same group of people would also say that some things are not at that level and are more where we would say they are preferences. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is actually. Okay, over to you, Mike. Sorry, not Mike. Brian. Let's get my words out. It's getting late for me, everybody.
Yeah, it is late here. First off, thank you, Minnow, for reminding us. Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Also, thank you, Snake, for turning a little bit of my brain inside in on itself, and for Mike for untwisting it again. And thank you, everybody, for completely deconstructing what I opened the stream with. Personally speaking, I do think that in addition to requiring perspective and context, morals are basically an inner gauge, yes, on the oughts, the planning for the future action that we personally are comfortable with, what our preferences are in that regard. And when we recoil from things, and when we're considering codifying them into law, we will basically assess it with the empathy that we have available to us. So I think it's generated by empathy, and I think it is an evolutionary emergence of our being a social ape. And other than that, he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
Which we forgot to say several episodes ago.
Yeah, but I thought I'd get it in now.
Yeah, nice. I like it. And yeah, I won't go to what I normally say after that. Okay, and just to round up the show, thank you once again, everybody, for being here. I found it an interesting discussion, and I'm glad we got to the Hume. And hopefully next time round we'll go a little further back in history, and maybe not. I'm not saying we'll get to Socrates, but you never know. One day. Over to you, Fabio.
So before you do, Fabio, I'd just like to retract what I said earlier about the Socrat shooting himself in the foot. He may have been right after all. I stand corrected.
No, yeah, it's okay.
I think that was more like, if there's a shooting in the foot, I think it's more likely to be a Brazilian fan.
Yeah. Anyway, so I actually found it fascinating that one of the first things we said in the beginning was let's not dwell into the various kind of morality, objective, whatever, moralism, stuff like that. So and focus on what actually is morality as an entity, right? And I found it really fascinating that at the beginning, the conversation seemed to go on that flow. It kind of dragged at the beginning. I'll grant you that, but it seems to be, kicking up okay. But then it really went on when people start talking about how morality should be. And that reminds me about the conversation that teenagers have about sex. They have no fucking idea what it is, but they keep bickering about how they should do it. It's weird. It just leaves me with a strange aftertaste in my mouth. But yeah, I guess it's the way things go.
That's because you're not doing it right. That's why.
Right. Yeah. No, but I mean, if you think about it, the whole conversation is actually, and then I'll shut up. It was a good description of what usually this conversation go through, right? In all the angles that I'm seeing in 20 and plus years. It always ends like that, It always ends on how it should be. Yeah, okay. What the fuck is it? No, yeah. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, that's how we should think about it. Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
It's so difficult because of that language. It's so like Leo first said. It's
That's
a
why we
language
should.
game in some sense, and that makes it extremely difficult to understand because we all have different interpretations of what we mean by the same word. And I reduce it to intuition on that basis. The other thing I personally want to end with, and I'll let everybody. We'll certainly be off stage, by the way, people. So when we go off air, there'll probably be conversation afterwards. However, I just want to say, look, there are so many different types of morality that are argued for and thought about over the centuries, right? If it shows you one thing, it's that there isn't one objective view of morality. I mean, that's got to be the case, right? That if there is such a thing as objective morality, it certainly isn't easy to find, right? And certainly just about everybody, has a different view of what the words mean. So I don't know what objective means on that basis, but so I agree that my position is one of somewhat subjectivity, although I can clearly see that there may be an objective grounding behind it because we're all human, I guess, in some sense, and that can be partaken and dissected in many, many ways. But I would agree with Patricia Churchland in that it seems like there is some kind of chemical basis to it. That's my personal view. And just before that's everybody summed up, Fabio, you wanted to say something extra, and I think somebody else might also. Go ahead.
No. I mean, not really. I was done. That's okay.
Okay. Anybody just want to add anything else that they think they've forgotten?
Yeah, just as you mentioned, the chemicals, the drugs, if you will, it does kind of boil down to what is it? Cortisol versus
oxytocin. Yeah.
Yes, oxytocin. Thank you. And the dopamine effect.
Yeah, could well do. Anybody else?
I would just like to tack on that I am a naturalist, so I think that normative reasoning is fundamentally a neurobiological process, just like all forms of thinking are. But I think that the is-ought distinction is largely a linguistic distinction, or as Piper said, a logical distinction. Logic and language are very closely
that's why we should have this conversation in German. Fuck English. It's a terrible language.
Oh dear!
All of them are.
I was thinking we could have it in Hebrew. So there you go. That makes a difference. Anyway, look, thank you very much, everybody. Next week we'll be back same time, same place with another.
What are we going to be talking about next week?
Inscrutable conversation. If I knew that, that, Leo, I would have a preference. And
It'll come to him in a dream sometime next week.
we usually make a topic 24 hours before, but given the fact that I won't be here next Thursday
Oh,
because it's my fucking birthday and I couldn't give a flying fuck about hanging out with you fuckers,
Well, happy birthday.
the topic will probably be terrible because Samus will come up with it.
Have a great birthday.
All right. Well,
Have
yeah,
a
have a
happy
great
birthday to
birthday,
you, Fabio.
Fabio, and we'll talk.
60
Simon.
for anybody interested, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure Brian and I will manage to come up with something in your absence. Fabio, have a great time, and of course, let's hope that McLaren win the championship.
Listen.